2020 is to start up in 2020.
You cannot pass a levy above that level now.
Okay.
I do want to make one clarifying point, and that's as far as the legal issues around levies. The problem wasn't the amount of levies that school districts were able to raise. It was what those proceeds were used for. And what the court has said very clearly is that you cannot use local levies for basic ed purposes. And so that McCleary group, one of the tasks was to ensure that there were parameters around the use of those levies, that there was an audit process in place that would ensure that the levies were only used for enhancements and not for local levies. It's not the amount that local districts can raise. That's not the issue. It's what those proceeds are being used for. And I think that's the thing that we have to keep an eye out, regardless of what you set that levy rate at or what communities decide to raise to help fund those extras that they want to put for their school children.
Paul, then Melissa.
For leaders Sullivan and Billig, are you personally in favor of a capital gains tax, and can you deliver your caucuses enough to overcome Republican opposition?
Well, our last several budgets actually in the House have relied on a capital gains excise tax. So from my perspective, yes, I'm personally in support of that tax. I can't say, until we actually caucus on it and have that conversation with our caucus, I can't say where we'll be this year. What's your sense of it, sir? My sense is that there was broad support in the past, and I expect that there'll be broad support again. I think tax equity is still a huge issue within our caucus and wanting to make sure that our system is more equitable. But it's also ensuring that we can pay for those things. We all talk about mental health, but at some point we have to talk about how we fund those programs that are so important for our constituents.
I don't think there's anybody that wants to raise taxes for the sake of taxes. It's maybe for the sake of tax fairness or for the sake of funding some program that will be a good investment for the people of Washington State. So in sort of a vacuum, capital gains tax, I think is challenging, but when you put it into the perspective of the investments that you can make with that money or the tax fairness that might come from other adjustments in the tax system, then I think it has a much better chance to pass. And I think what are all of those other factors in terms of what we might be able to invest in or what might be those tax fairness benefits? We don't know yet. As I said in the last question, is that we need to dive into that balance and figure out what would those investments go for. And then I think that will tell us if we have the support, because if it's going to investments that are really meaningful, then I think the support will be there.
And I take it, sir, that you are personally in favor.
Well, I'm not in a vacuum. So if I would want to look at what is that capital gains tax? What's the benefit that's coming from that capital gains tax? Are we making the tax system more fair for the people of Washington State? Are we helping small businesses to be successful? Are we preventing some really devastating cut that would otherwise happen? Once we know what those things are, yeah, I could see myself supporting it, but I would need to know what we're getting in exchange for that capital gains tax before I could tell you 100% that we'll be able to pass it.
Senator Schessler, Representative Wilcox, if you guys, I think we know where you stand on the issue of the capital gains tax, but if you want to talk about your thoughts on it.
Well, it's an income tax, period. It is an income tax. And so far, I haven't seen any fairness, any willingness to put it in the Constitution where it would be locked in. So, I guess it's maybe not the polite thing, but it's kind of a bait and switch if you go that route.
Well, I think I may be, Andy and I came in at the same time, so we had a similar experience. I think I was the only freshman on, we called it House Ways and Means then, in 2011. And my first vote in the legislature was the biggest supplementary reduction in the state general fund in history. And if you remember, there were overwhelming crowds inside that hearing room. There were angry people. There were security issues. And what had happened is we had a time in 2007 and 2008 and 2009 that was very much like it is now. It was at the end of an economic cycle. There was an immense number of dollars flowing into state coffers. That wasn't enough for the ambitions of the legislature then. They increased revenue and spent it all. And the result was almost immediately, following the startup of new programs and expansion of existing programs, we had to make deep cuts in programs. And the programs that were cut were the ones that affected people that needed help the most. Those had to do with higher ed and a number of social aid programs. And I think one thing that we need to be very cautious about right now, we're in the second longest economic recovery in history, last I read. We know that the storm is coming, and rather than growing a reliance on state government even more, I think we should be thinking really hard about dialing into the most important priorities, understanding that within the next few years, we will have another budget crisis, and make sure that we have a long-term sustainable spending plan so that we don't hurt the people that we want to help the most.
Melissa, then Jonathan.
The governor put out a climate package that was in addition to his budget, one of his many, many press conferences in the past few weeks. And I'm curious what each of you thinks about the approach he put forth that doesn't include a carbon tax or a carbon fee this time, but instead is more regulatory, with a low carbon fuel standard included, and also a push to go to clean electricity totally by 2045 or something like that. What do you think about that approach, and how realistic do you think that is in a session where you have these other challenges this year? We can start with you, JT, and then just go down the line.
Well, perfect. Thank you for calling on me and avoiding all the doubt. You know, we're not opposed to working on any environmental priorities, I think, and there's some that House Republicans have been very supportive of. The one that occurs to me first has to do with culvert removal, where I think we've been the most aggressive caucus out there in trying to save salmon and improve existing runs and open up habitat that's already there. When it comes to carbon, we've supported a lot of the House Democrats and the governor's approaches. And what I think our test will always be is how much benefit do you get for the dollars that are spent? And it's amazing how often you can find a much cheaper way per ton of reducing carbon if you look at incentives and if you look at activities that are already occurring. And we know, oddly, that forests are one of the biggest contributors to carbon because we burn them down by accident. And at the same time, they're by far the largest means of sequestering carbon. And you're going to see, I think, a really innovative approach from Representative Richard DeVolt soon that would, if it's adopted, accomplish everything that the governor would like to do.
Certainly look forward to seeing that proposal by Representative DeVolt, and I do hope we can work across the aisle and actually have a bipartisan solution this year to climate change, because it's something that we can't ignore. I mean, you're seeing the impacts across the country, and you're seeing them here in our state. And the wildfires are getting worse and worse. You know, what happened in California this past year, I'd hate to see that to that level here in Washington State. Joe Fitzgibbon is the chair of our Energy and Environment Committee and is taking the lead on this issue. And I know he's working with a number of our members. He's worked with the governor's office, and I expect that there'll be a number of proposals out very soon to deal with those issues that you just mentioned. And, you know, again, we have 12 new members in our caucus this year, which is very exciting. I mean, they are wonderful people. They are eager to get to work. But, you know, it'll take some time for us to work through these issues and determine which ones we're going to pass and which ones we'll wait around for the next year.
Well, I appreciated the governor's bold proposal, and I think there's a lot there. I mean, one of the things when you go out and talk to voters, I always think of clean air and clean water as one of those bobblehead issues where people just start, you know, they nod their head like they get this. And particularly when you talk specifically about climate, and people are concerned about this. We have to take action. We have to take action not just for the impact that we can have, but Washington is in a position to be a leader as a state. And we've done this in other issues where we take a bold position and other states follow suit. And when we do that, we can have even an outsized and more meaningful impact than even just our state's impact. And so I look forward to doing that. I think there's the 100% renewable bill, I think is going to get a lot of consideration. The electric vehicle proposals, I think there's some, the orca and salmon recovery efforts. There's a plastics bill that I think is going to get a lot of consideration. There's oil transportation safety, which is definitely an environmental priority. So I think we'll be looking at all of that, and I think we'll be able to make some progress this year.
Well, thank you, Melissa. You know, sometimes we would be led to believe that we're not a clean state, and we really are one of the cleanest states in America. Our percentage of clean, renewable, affordable hydro is north of 70%. The only coal plant in the state is going to phase out in the not too distant future. Our cars are cleaner. If you look in my own district, Avista negotiated a deal with their customers to put the state's largest solar farm in that doesn't impact low-income ratepayers because companies that want that power are buying it. You go south of Spokane, they made the best deal to date on wind power. So we really are a clean state. And we can get better if we get off the perpetual tax bandwagon. And a lot of these things, while not directly a tax, they really are. Low carbon fuel standards will raise fuel prices without getting any benefit to the highways. If you look at mandates in other areas, they impact low-income residents, hardworking taxpayers of this state as well. So we've proposed areas in the past that we could work with. We hope that the governor's more broad-minded in some of those things this year that we could agree on that don't tax the hardworking taxpayers here in the state of Washington.
Jonathan Martin, then Drew. Jonathan's toward the back.
Thanks. Washington has the 5th largest homeless population in the country, and homelessness is growing outside the city of Seattle faster than inside the city of Seattle. What are you going to do on the homelessness crisis, especially in suburban and rural areas?
Well, we started talking about that long time ago, and you know, you have to increase supply. Supply lowers prices, controls prices. We have to look at condo liability. Condos can work in Bellevue, Spokane, or Pullman, but we're not building them that put it in. Some of our archaic building codes don't allow for what used to be known as a mother-in-law apartment, now is ancillary housing, small or tiny houses that we increase the supply to control prices. Clearly very helpful. In other areas, we have to remember that the GMA is not the 10 Commandments. It can be amended periodically. And I think the other area in homelessness is the agreement of my colleagues and myself that mental health is a key portion. And if you control prices through supply, work on mental health, I think we can make progress. But if we compare across the state, Seattle spends about double per capita on homelessness per person that Spokane does. We see what is working, what won't work, and some of the big picture things that I think we find considerable agreement on.
Yeah, I think this is going to be another area where we've agreed across the aisle on the problem and even agreed on some of the solutions. I think condo liability is definitely something that we need to move forward on that will be helpful. You know, one of the things that I mentioned earlier in one of the earlier answers about upstream solutions, and I think in homelessness is definitely an end result. That's a crisis we need to take care of today, but to really solve it, we've got to look further upstream. And Senator Schessler is exactly right. Mental health is one of those drivers. Our foster care system is a driver. We have a lot of kids who leave the foster care system. I forget the exact percentage, but a staggering high percentage of kids who exit the foster care system become homeless. We have people coming out of prison who don't have the supports that they need to find appropriate housing. So if we look upstream and say, how can we prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place, is going to be a lot more effective than addressing it, the crisis after it happens. So we need to take care of the crisis, but we really, for the long-term solution, have to look upstream. And it's definitely an area of focus. Again, if you look at the committee structures for this year, we made a change for the first time, created this Housing Affordability and Stability Committee that Senator Cooter is going to chair, and she's going to be, our quarterback on housing issues, and really felt that that was needed because this is something that we're a problem that we're seeing throughout the state that needs a focus in the legislature.
And I would agree with Senator Billig's response as far as, trying to actually address the issues that lead to homelessness. I think that is obviously the heart of the problem that we have to address. And I hope when you, during that next panel, I ask the same question to Speaker Chop, something that he's been passionate about during his entire stay here in the legislative process. And so I know that he's got a lot of ideas personally that he'd like to see implemented, and he'll be bringing those forward this year. I think that you mentioned as far as the suburbs and the rural communities, I remember, 20 years ago, this is seen basically as a Seattle problem. It wasn't a suburban problem. It wasn't a rural problem. When you go to Auburn or when you go to Kent, you see a significant homeless problem that wasn't there necessarily 20 years ago, or at least it wasn't talked about. And now it's, when the city of Auburn comes into lobby every year, that's the first issue that they talk about. I think the solutions aren't the same necessarily for suburbs or for rural communities that are the same solutions that may work in Seattle. I think that we have to, again, work with our local governments. Mayor Backus in Auburn is eager to work with us on solutions that are specific to Auburn. And shared resources that will help address those issues. But I think that we have made some progress over the last several years, but we've got a long way to go, and we have to ensure that the resources that we employ are actually used effectively and actually help address the problem that exists. Because far too many times we see those dollars are used ineffectively and don't solve the problem.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, for asking, especially the format that you use, because this is one of the things that should unify us. It's not a purely urban problem anymore. The smallest towns now have homeless populations, and the smallest school districts are giving out backpacks to homeless kids. My wife's a lifelong teacher, and there's not a year goes by that some of her students in the Yelm School District don't get those backpacks. And I think it's been a problem that's been 20 years in the making, too. We certainly have addiction and mental health problems that contribute to it. In fact, they're major contributors, but there's also availability and affordability. And I think what we have created is a very rigid structure that makes it really hard to do two things. First of all, it's hard to build, it's hard to add capacity, and at the same time, in places where maybe you could add capacity in terms of housing, we've crushed employment in small towns and small cities. And so we've got this huge mismatch between places where housing's affordable and places where the jobs are. And I think we have to address GMA in both of those ways. Now, I'm going to tease this a little bit because we've got someone in our caucus who has housed more people than almost anyone in that building, and that's my seatmate Andrew Barkis, who has managed around 2,000 single-family homes for his whole career. He is an innovative thinker, and he has also identified another issue that you hear about in Seattle but not elsewhere, and that is how can we address the reasons that people are losing their housing because of affordability. They're housed now, and a month later they're not there anymore. And he's been a landlord, as I said, but he's also spent his life counseling people so that they don't get evicted. And he's going to be working hard with the cooperation of other landlords to prevent people from losing their housing in the first place. And I'm really excited for him to roll out his proposals. And I think you're going to be excited by that too.
Drew and then Camden.
So the State Salary Commission has made a recommendation to give legislators a raise near 18% over the next few years. Senator Braun has filed a letter saying they should reconsider that. Is that something you or your caucuses could get behind, saying we don't want that raise?
So, you know, we have I won't say it's a unique legislature. I think every legislature is a little different when you go state by state, but we have one that welcomes everyone to have an opportunity to serve. And you have some people who are wealthy, who have the capacity to serve here without any problem. There are others that struggle because they need a second job in order to afford to be able to serve. So I think, you know, there's a fine line. We have to make sure that, you know, obviously we don't have salaries that are growing out of control, and that there is a lot of concern about that level of increase that's being proposed. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we allow people to actually run for office and to serve. You know, I think with the way our system is set up now, it does actually discourage an average person for running for office simply because they can't afford to do so. And so trying to balance that is something that we need to look at very closely.
Camden.
Senator Shessler, can I, just because Senator Braun has done it, just wondering if that might be something that your caucus gets behind or not?
You know, Senator Braun told me he was going to do it. I said, you know, you're welcome to state your position. I have never asked the State Salary Commission for a raise, and I never will. And I personally fear a legislature that the salary becomes primary to your livelihood, that you don't need anything, because then you have a full-time legislature that spends its full time making government bigger and more expensive. So I don't want to get to that point, and I'll never ask them for a nickel.
I'm wondering what each of you think is the proper way out of the debate over legislative public records. Senator Billig, you don't get to start very much because you're sitting in the middle, so why don't you give it a shot?
Jim, I'm so glad you asked that question. Thank you. No, you know, I think we've learned a lot over the last year. I think if to do over again, we would have started with a process where we get input, and that's what happened with the legislative task force that happened. So I think that was a good step forward, and I think we have to take what we've learned through that task force, take what we've learned over the last year, and I think we've all, you know, become more expert in the Public Records Act. We understand it better. So I speak for myself. I understand it a lot better than I did a year ago. And I think we need to be more open as a legislature. And I look forward to working with my colleagues this session to try to come up with a solution that will help make the legislature more open.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
We can kind of go the other way around and get keep going.
Yeah, and I would agree with what Senator Billig has said. We have learned a lot over the last year, but I'll also say this is something that's currently being litigated. You know, it's before the Supreme Court, and so, I mean, it's tough to have a conversation right now publicly while that lawsuit is in existence. But that being said, I think there will be a number of bills that will be introduced this session. We're certainly going to use a process that is a thorough process. It will go before a standard committee process and floor process. It won't look anything like what happened last year. But you know, we'll continue to have those conversations.
But it was currently being litigated last year when you guys introduced the legislation. Are you going to wait for the Supreme Court to make a decision, or are you going to move forward with legislation before that?
Like I said, there will be a number of bills introduced, and we'll go through that process. You know, we'll see where our caucus is, like we do on any other bill.
Well, I think we've been pretty consistent. We released a public letter the day that the governor vetoed the original bill, said we wanted to go forward on the basis of the Paul Graves bill that he dropped last year, which I think was one of the most maximum approaches. We've got members that are concerned about whistleblower protections, and Melissa has done a really good job of schooling everybody on what protections are already in the Public Records Act, and I think we're going to stay consistent with the position that we announced then, and I can get you a copy of that letter if you want it.
Senator Schissler, you want to?
Well, since I was named in the litigation personally, I'll leave this one alone.
Okay. Your caucuses have had to revisit sexual harassment training and protocol sparked by stories out of the Capitol that were part of the national conversation on this issue. And there's currently an investigation that's ongoing in the Senate as we speak. So beyond additional training, what specific steps are your caucuses taking to ensure that staffers or others who have experiences feel safe in reporting them? And is it something that you have to do legislatively, or is this stuff that you can do just within your own caucus rules? And anyone who wants to start.
Yeah, I'll start. Well, I'm proud of the work that our chamber has done and the legislature has done to create a respectful workplace policy. It was staff-driven. So to your point about involving the staff, this is a staff-driven process. We now have the policy. I think we're going to take the steps coming up to put that to reference it in the Senate rules. And I don't think we have to pass legislation to make it binding and effective. And we have currently, as you said, the first case under that policy proceeding as intended by the policy, and I think we'll see the results of that within the next couple of weeks.
And I'm also proud of the work that we've done in the House. We had a bipartisan task force that met during the interim. It consisted of legislators, partisan staff members, as well as nonpartisan staff members, as well as lobbyists. And they came forward with recommendations that will go to executive rules. We're working our way through those recommendations right now. It includes creating a separate entity to do investigations and where people can come to make complaints. So we're looking seriously at that. Some of what they want to do will take legislation. And so we'll have to look at working with the Senate to see where we can get agreement on those issues. They also came up with the code of conduct, which I think is very important, that we adopt that code of conduct, whether we do it through a concurrent resolution or whether we pass a bill or whether we do it administratively. I think it needs to be very public so that people can see what we've done and what we're expecting of our legislators and the legislative community as a whole.
I think in the closing days of the past majority, we got the ball rolling. We handed it off to the new majority, and Senator Rivers, Senator Becker, senior staff have worked a lot of hours coming up with policy with folks across the aisle, F&O, to get to, I think one of the things scheduled today is the training. And whether we're able to address it through concurrent resolution, F&O, or whether we need actual legislation, I think we just have to determine that yet what actually has to be. And I think there's no doubt about a commitment to a better workplace by all four caucuses.
I would say that one thing that I've learned in my private career is that rules and procedures and codes of conduct are absolutely necessary. You can't do without it. People need to understand that there's parameters, and just as importantly, people need to understand that there's recourse if they're the victim of mistreatment. But that's only part of the answer. The other part of the answer is the necessity for constant communication, especially in a place like this where there is rapid turnover. And people need to understand, people of multiple generations and multiple backgrounds need to constantly be reminded that this is a professional workplace, even though conditions are very unusual here in terms of hours of work and the proximity to so many other people. And we need to make absolutely sure that we're taking every effort on a daily basis in this sense of reminder and also of understanding that we're not going to tolerate mistreatment, so that we don't put people through the very painful experiences that they've been through. And at the same time, we don't lose valuable people if you can possibly prevent that by preventing misunderstandings.
All right, we have time for one more question. Does any of the incoming intern class have any questions for the legislature? Okay. All right, John, go ahead.
I'm going to copy Paul's question earlier on capital gains tax, but switch it over to the governor's proposal to raise the B&O tax on service businesses. Where do your caucuses stand on that proposal?
We had that fight in the House, gosh, I think 5 years ago. And, you know, people always introduce that as a tax on lawyers because maybe that's a little more popular. But we had a campaign that said, are you on the list? And it turns out that there's an immense number of occupations and people that are not part of the legal profession that are impacted as well. And referencing my early remarks, this is not the time to grow the size of government. This is the time to manage the size of government. I think my caucus is going to be pretty solidly behind trying to push back against that B&O tax proposal.
So we've had proposals in the House over the last several years that would attempt to try to make the B&O tax at least a little more equitable, exempting more of those businesses that shouldn't have to file at all. And so raising that threshold for those businesses. And that's something I think we'll continue to look at as a caucus. You know, when I've talked to the business community, many of those businesses that have visited, auto dealers, just local business owners, think the B&O tax is vastly unfair. It's not a system that works very well, especially for those businesses that have a very low margin of profit. And you've had some conversation here about tax reform or making our system more equitable. And I would love to be able to sit down with the Republican caucuses as well as the Senate Democrats to figure out if there is a way to get there on that. But going back to what Senator Billig said from the very start, we have a process here. We go through the budget line by line. I can't tell you how many hours we put into scouring the budget, looking for savings, then setting priorities. And so this is a conversation that won't happen likely until March as far as whether additional resources are needed and where those resources should come from. But for certain, we want to make sure that they don't hurt those that are already being overburdened by high taxes.
Anyone else want to speak to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, in 2010, the solution to the recession was a temporary B&O tax. And the governor and many others worked as hard as they could to make it permanent after they told the public this is only temporary. My caucus said then, there are no votes in our caucus and there never will be. I don't think we've changed.
I think my answer, very similar to the earlier answer, is that we have to do that balancing act and look at what are the important investments that we need to make or should be making for the people of Washington State, because those investments are going to help improve quality of life, are going to make good fiscal sense in the long term. And once we know what those investments are, and then I think we have to balance that with where we have resources, where we have support for resources, and figure that out. And I think there are a number, if we do need additional revenue, I think there are a number of options to choose from. We've heard about two of them today. There are others as well. But I think we have to look at it overall and say, what is it that we buy, whether it's that investment or that tax fairness or some combination of tax fairness. And in B&O tax, as Representative Sullivan said, we've got some work to do if we want to. I think we could really make progress in making the B&O tax more fair and better, especially for small businesses. And I'd welcome that opportunity.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for this panel. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you all for your questions. We'll be back here in about 5 minutes to start the second panel.
TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. Every committee hearing, every floor debate, Watch every part of your 2019 state legislature on the web at tvw.org. We live stream all committee hearings and floor sessions in both the House and Senate. Miss a debate you wanted to see? We archive everything for on-demand viewing on our website. It's your state legislature. Catch it online at tvw.org. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Stream TVW video and audio anywhere, anytime from your Android or Apple device with TVW's new mobile app. Get it now, free from the App Store or Google Play, and watch TVW anywhere.
Geography has made us neighbors. History has made us friends. Economics has made us partners. And necessity has made us allies.
We're all neighbors in one sense or another. What ties us together is what fuels the future of our communities. The Western States Petroleum Association is dedicated to ensuring Americans have access to reliable petroleum products and supports economically and environmentally responsible policies that benefit everyone. After all, we're all neighbors.
Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. TVW thanks the cable television industry. Cable providers across the state carry TVW for free as a public service, enabling Washingtonians to watch their state government in action. Catch a special opening day edition of TVW's The Impact. Live interviews with legislative leaders and Governor Jay Inslee. Monday, January 14th, starting at 9 a.m. Live on TV and live on the web at tvw.org. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government.
Questions for you. He'll probably be here till about 11:30 or 11:40, so have your questions ready. And Governor Jay Inslee.
All right. Thank you. Great introduction. Good morning. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Looking forward to this discussion, looking forward to this session. I want to start my comments by saying something that I feel very strongly that I don't think it says enough in our democracy, is that thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for your profession. Thank you for giving democracy a better chance to succeed, because we have credible professional people who dedicate their professional lives to trying to give people the truth as we know it and as we argue about it. And I just got to tell you, the longer I'm work in the vineyards of democracy, the more I understand the importance of your profession. And I say that because in many cases you've been threatened. We've had violence against your members. And we know that people have disparaged some of your work. And I just want to tell you, I think it's very vital to our democracy what you're doing. And I hope your ranks will expand over time. I like seeing you. I hope you find friends and you build your ranks. So thanks for what you do. It's really, really important. Now, having said that, this I win a license to be able to have Jamie call you and make gentle suggestions about your stories too, just so you know. So we won that right in that regard. I started here in state government 30 years ago this month, and I was just reminiscing about that. We had a bipartisan group of legislators for breakfast this morning to talk about early childhood education. Convened by, of course, legendary legislator Ruth Kagi. And I was just thinking about how I'm so thrilled about this legislative session. I am perhaps as much or more excited about the beginning of the legislative session than I was as a young fellow back 30 years ago from Seattle, Washington. And one of the reasons is we're still working on the things that I was working on then. I remember that one of the first votes I cast was to try to boost our early child education efforts. This was 30 years ago, and now I get to work with a new crop of legislators, and there's good bipartisan support, I think, for expanding our early child education opportunity. It's just kind of a thrill to be working on something for decades. We've made progress in our state, and it's one of the things that I hope we're going to have a bipartisan success on this year, to give more young kids a real shot to be ready for elementary school. So I'm really primed, and I feel young in this regard, even though I've been here off and on for about 30 years. So let's talk about what we want to get done. I think this may be one of the most ambitious agenda items that I've proposed as governor, but I think rightfully so, because we've made really great progress in the state of Washington, but we know that the times demand that we up our game and raise our sights and be willing to put our shoulders to the wheel. And so I'm really excited about this. And by the way, the new crop of legislators, there's so much talent in this group. There is such great diversity in this group. I think it's great to see our legislature look more like the whole state of Washington, and it does because some of the people that were sent here to do business, and I'm excited about it. Many things to do. Top of the list, climate change. What I'm proposing this year is different than previous proposals, but it is just as bold. It is a compilation of work that we know gives us a great chance to reduce our state's emissions and meet our statewide goals, which are now in law to reduce our carbon emissions. And the reason for that is obvious, and I'm excited about the proposals we're making because they fit the moment and they work. So I'm going to look forward to working with legislators to advancing them. And we know that there is no greater job creation opportunity than driving these clean energy jobs revolution, which we're doing today. We know legislators can help speed our transition to a 100% clean energy economy. We know that we're going to have cleaner transportation fuels. We're going to have better transportation options. We're going to electrify vehicles on our roads. We're going to construct ultra-high efficient buildings. We're going to get rid of super pollutants. And we're going to create jobs by the bushelful in the process. So I'm excited to get going on those efforts. This year, we're going to work on behavioral health. And all of us know that we can and must make improvements in providing for the behavioral health of our citizens. And I look forward to working with Senator Carlisle, Representative Fitzgibbon, and others to get that job done. And so many others who've really pitched in. This is a transformative effort. This is an issue not just of scope or scale, but an issue of transformation of how we provide these services. So we need to increase the scale of our efforts, the number of people that are served. But we also have to transform the method by which we provide these services by going to a much better, more community-based system of providing these services where people live, where they work, where their neighbors are, where they go to church. This is the modern way to provide behavioral services, health services, and we intend to transform the system in that regard. We intend to move forward on keeping the heart of Washington beating, which is our orcas resident pod of our orcas. And while we do that, we will not just be caring for orcas, we will be caring for our salmon, and we will be caring for ourselves. We know that we've heard voices around the world who have been touched by the plight of our orcas, and we know that they are carried in the hearts across the state of Washington. And one thing about the orcas that I've learned is that there is no single answer to saving the orcas. We know that we've changed our environment, our ecosystem over the last century and a half dramatically across the state of Washington, and we will need to do many things to give the orcas a shot of survival. So we have proposed a suite of policies, both short-term and long-term, that are necessary for success of the orcas. I want to note, and this is, I think, important, these things that I have proposed for orcas are also extremely important for our salmon populations. So the salmon are part of our heritage as well. And when you save the orcas, by necessity, you give salmon the chance to increase and help both fisheries and the wild stocks that are involved in our salmon populations. So we need to do many things: reduce toxins, reduce noise, reduce water temperature, further examine the impacts of potentially breaching dams, increasing our ability to monitor compliance. All of these things have to be married with the existing constitutional obligation to remove culverts that today block fish passage in so many of our rivers. So these are incredible opportunities for success, not just for the orcas, but in our many other things we value in the state of Washington. On education, you know, we have done so much, perhaps more in the last several years than we've ever done in the state of Washington. But we want to build on that success, starting with actually fulfilling the promise of fulfilling the McCleary decision. And we need to find a way to generate $4 billion to do that, which is the sort of second installment of the McCleary decision. And I think people need to be aware of that, because I think folks think that McCleary was somehow behind us. Actually, the next big step is in front of us to be able to finance this $4 billion amount that legislators promised in the last session. But there's so many things that we can continue to do in education. Increase our access to our quality early child education programs. Continue to increase, as we have been doing, the ability to finance a college education. And I'm proud that we've already helped 24,000 students. We now need to fulfill the state need grant Washington promise. And provide new, entirely new ways for career training. And this is one of the most exciting things I think that's available to us this year, which is to figure out how to train some journalists to turn off their cell phones. This is one of our programs. I'm not going to rat you out, John, at all. I would never do that. But really, I'm so excited about our career-connected learning opportunities, because I frankly think we've made a mistake for decades telling our kids that if they don't get a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree, they have no chance in life. That's just wrong. And now we are leading the country in developing whole new pathways of career readiness through the development of this career-connected learning program, so that we can join other places like Switzerland, where 70% of the youth have access to a paid apprenticeship while they're in high school. And that gets kids really motivated to be successful in so many different ways. So we've led many things in the country. I look forward to leading on career-connected learning as well. We're going to have success in creating a robust broadband access, because we know access to broadband is so important, not just to rural economic development for small towns, but for access to health care, for access to educational opportunities. This probably is the most important thing we can do in rural economic development. We've made some starts on that. We got to continue down the road. I'm looking forward to fulfilling the promise that we had good success on in advancing our de-escalation efforts and in making sure that we enact the changes through Initiative 940. I want to applaud the stakeholders on this issue who have remained committed to the compromise on how to move forward on this important issue. I'm pleased with the progress of Initiative 1000. This is a very well-considered approach to tackling persistent barriers that we still maintain, that are still there for people to develop their dreams of jobs and education, to people with disabilities, people of color, veterans, women who want to pursue opportunities to make the most of their lives in the state of Washington, and I'm pleased to support it. We've made a first step on a couple issues that we need to continue work on. One, removes some of the criminal convictions for the records of people who have marijuana convictions. I started that process by announcing my Marijuana Justice Initiative, and there's going to be some legislative initiatives that I look forward to joining people on to expand that in an appropriate way as we go forward. I hope that legislators will also finish the work that I started by creating a moratorium on the death penalty, by ending the death penalty in the state of Washington. It is a just thing to do, and I hope that legislators will get that job done. So, looking forward to a big year, looking forward to your questions, and let's have at them.
Governor, you're off to Nevada this weekend, for a campaign visit. Would you respond to the criticism that you are now choosing policies for this state with more of an eye to the primary states?
Yeah, it's not the case. That's my best answer. Look, politics, you get a lot of criticism. I understand that. I'm not sure that one makes a lot of sense. So if you look at the things I'm proposing, actually, these are things that I've had deep in my heart for 30 years. It should be no surprise I'm advancing early child education. One of my first votes here, which was controversial at the time in Yakima, was to expand early child education. I've been fighting to save us from the disasters of climate change for over a decade, and I think that probably is not a surprise to people. The reason I went into public life was because of education. I didn't get into this for sort of wanting to have something on my resume. I got into this because in about 86, 87, we had failed 6 bond issues in Selah, Washington to build a new high school. We were going to have to start double shifting our high school. And I kind of looked around and said, well, let's try again, and nobody else would except Trudy and Bill and Sally Douglas. And we co-chaired the 7th try, and we passed it on the 7th try, and we got that passed, and then right after that, the legislature came in and cut the funding formula like in half. And I was really angry about that because it wasn't allowing us to build this high school. So Trudy suggested that if I really wanted to do something about this, I'd run for the legislature, and I did. I've been working on education for a long, long time. I've been working on for justice issues, economic justice issues, for a long time. When I was a young legislator out of Yakima, there was a bill that came up to give unemployment compensation to farm workers. And people argued, well, geez, you can't vote for that, Jay. You're in a very red district, agricultural district. Very few voters were agricultural workers, Hispanic agricultural workers at that time. But I got underdogs in my heart all the time. And it made no sense to me that the hardest working people in the state of Washington wouldn't have unemployment compensation. Just like it makes sense to me right now that we got Coast Guard people who are having to do their jobs that aren't getting paid by the federal government. I get a little steamed about these things when there's not something fair to working people. So I took that vote, and by some miracle I got reelected, and now I'm fighting on issues from the Muslim ban to the efforts to degrade working people's rights, And I'm proud that during my time, we've made success of having the best early child education in the United States. We have increased our minimum wage perhaps more than anybody in the United States. We have the best gender pay equity issues in the United States, and we have just got started. So I respect all criticism, and I reject all bad criticism, so I reject that one.
But do the people of Washington State have your full attention in this legislative session?
You bet. And I think the best evidence of that is just look at the last couple of weeks. In the last couple of weeks, I have been engaged, and many of you have come to our events. Look at what we've done together in the last several weeks. We started an ORCA recovery program, of a very sophisticated program, not a bumper sticker, but a very comprehensive program of recovering orcas. We've started this path down to marijuana sort of justice. We've announced our early education platform. We've rolled out a very appropriate budget to the issues that we have today. We've announced our very sophisticated climate proposal that's tuned to the state of Washington's efforts. And there's one or two others. Somebody help me. Jamie, give me, what are the ones have I forgotten the last 2 weeks? I'm sure there's one or two. Public health. Listen, we announced our public option just a couple days ago. So I think just by looking the last several weeks, we're getting the job done here because I love this state, and I'm going to continue to love this state no matter what.
Governor, your earlier budgets in your time as governor had kind of very large single climate change combat programs, cap and trade, carbon fee. And of course, those didn't get through the legislature. Voters have twice rejected carbon fees. In retrospect, would your time have been better served by advancing smaller, more dispersed proposals like you're doing this year to actually make tangible progress on climate change?
Well, I don't drive in the rearview mirror, so I'm not going to really totally answer that question because I'm looking forward rather than backwards. But I'm not sure I would reach that conclusion because it's a lot of things in life. There's a socialization issue. There's a reaching a tipping point issue. There's a timing issue, and we've advanced the ball by getting people to focus on this. And we have made progress while I've been here. Look, we've got one of the better clean energy research and development budgets in the United States. We've got a clean energy deployment program that's building companies around the state of Washington. We've got the best, one of, if not the best, electrification program to electrify our transportation to help people get electric cars. We've built electric charging stations up and down our interstate system. We are educating our children in the science of climate change. And I'm proud to have helped many people pass the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which has created a multi-billion-dollar wind industry in the state of Washington. So we've got significant things done already. So no, I wouldn't look backwards in that regard. And what I would say about the moment we are at right now is, I do believe we have reached a tipping point where there is very sound and significant support for action against climate change and a recognition that this is a great job creation message. On the tipping point, the reason that has happened is that what used to be a graph on a chart is now ash on the hood of your car in Seattle when you wake up last summer, and our forests are all burning down, and there's ash on the hood of your car. And the swimming pools in Wenatchee and Tri-Cities are closed because kids can't go outside and can't breathe. This is no longer an abstraction to people, it is a reality in their lives. And number two, we now can justifiably share with people the good news that while we're beating climate change, we're growing jobs all over the state of Washington. So the policies that I'm proposing this year will help the development that we are now seeing the first steps on. I think it's great that the largest manufacturer of carbon fiber in the Western Hemisphere that goes into electric cars, where is that? It's in Moses Lake, Washington. You know, I just did the ribbon cutting in Lind, Washington, a town of several hundred, of 170 acres of solar panels surrounded by wheat fields. I compared it to a new kind of photosynthesis. You know, wheat does the old kind of photosynthesis, we're doing the new kind. And that community, kind of a Republican trending community, loved this project because it helped economic development in Lind, Washington. We're doing biofuels in Grace Harbor and shipping biofuels where we bring in feedstock from various places and ship biofuels. And someday we're going to, I believe there's a good probability we'll be flying on biofuels and on Boeing airplanes. We've already flown some of those. So this is a tipping point moment. We've had also the arrival of new legislators. I don't know all the legislators, but I know 10 of them, all of whom I believe are committed to help fashion a response to this. So I feel really excited about our opportunities this year.
So I know you say that there's the obligation for McCleary that remains outstanding, but when you say that you need new tax revenue to pay for that, have you looked at the revenue forecast that says that after the 2-year budget cycle ends, there's $700 million left after finishing the McCleary obligation? And if so, why not, you know, talk about those tax increases paying for ORCA recovery and paying for mental health as opposed to paying for education when that can be done in existing revenues?
Well, I wish those numbers added up, but they just don't add up. Numbers are very stubborn, you know, they just like you got to add them up and there's no fudging them. They don't add up. Simply put, in order to finance the McCleary decision, which is about a $4 billion project, and provide services for the people of the state of Washington at existing level of services, and remove culverts where there is a $2 billion price tag that we've been given. We've been ordered by the federal courts to come up with $2 billion for culverts. We have been ordered by the courts, both federal and state, to come up with millions of dollars to increase our behavioral health programs. We have what I would consider a moral obligation to help with our homelessness populations. We've got what I believe is a very smart investment to invest in our 3- and 4-year-olds to prevent them, to give them a shot at life so they maybe don't end up in our prisons, and that's pretty expensive. And you do the math, it doesn't add up. Now, why do we have a $700 million reserve? It's because there is a recession out there somewhere, and it does make sense to have some reserve. If I can just for a moment answer just a little more depth to your question. So this is about a 20% or 21% increase in state spending over the biennium. About 14 to 15% of that is what is required, which you just the book of business to require existing level of services to the people of the state of Washington. It takes 14 or 15% increase just to do that. Why is that? Because we have over 100,000 people moving here every year or two, and they bring kids with them, and those kids need to be educated, and we need to provide services to them in 1,000 different ways. We are a growing budget because we are a growing state. That's one of the facts. The second is the remaining percentage of that 21% is dollars that are either constitutionally mandated that we spend, and I just mentioned some of them, or what I consider moral obligations to do something about homelessness. And you do the math, and that's the way it ends up. So that's the answer to your question.
Actually, though, my question was, why do you keep saying it's for education and not say it's for those other things? Are they less popular? Why do that?
I think I just told you what it was for, and education was the biggest part of that, but it is only one of those parts. I will repeat myself for clarity, just to make sure there's no, look, we have constitutional and moral obligations to people in addition to the K through 12 system. They add up, in addition to what it costs to run the state of Washington, they add up to, 5 to 6% in addition. And we've got a constitutional obligation to do that. Now, I can't just tell the courts, just kiss off. It doesn't work that way. The courts have said we need to improve our mental health care system. Now, that's a moral obligation as well. They said we need to fix and replace the culverts. They've said we need to do many things, and that costs money to do that. And that's on top. The reason I start with education, however, though, is that it is by far the biggest. It's a $4 billion. And I also start by mentioning education for this reason. I do believe people thought that the McCleary decision was resolved last time and they weren't going to have any more financial burden. The reason this is going to surprise a lot of people is what happened in the last budget. We only paid for 1 year of this. Now we got to pay for 2 years of this. And so that number is just a lot bigger on people's windshield than they thought it was going to be. And so it's important to realize that.
Governor, what should specifically be done to address concerns that staffers at Western Hospital have about daily assaults, as well as overtime they say that they've been forced to work?
Yes, this has been a continuing concern of ours. I met 3 days ago with Cheryl and the safety coordinator. I met with the staff there a few weeks ago. We have a very detailed plan, which I will share with you, to respond to this continuing need. We have to do some structural things, including putting plexiglass around the nursing stations to prevent assaults. We need to continue and up our training, which we are doing. We have a new level of training for personnel. We need to hire more people, and that's one of the reasons why there has been so much overtime, because we still are understaffed. Now, we have increased, since I've been governor, fairly dramatically. Basically, Western State was gutted during the recession. Since then, we've been building staff levels, but we still don't have enough people working there, and that's the principal reason why there's been overtime that is of concern to people. So we have a lot more work to do. I can assure you that a lot is being done there, and it's going to continue, and I'll ask Jamie to give you a kind of a description of a more detailed description. We have a document about that I talked to Cheryl about just a couple days ago. Go ahead.
Yes, Governor. One reason to pass a capital gains tax is to get more revenue. Another reason is to address the regressivity of our taxation system and to address income inequality. Is there a plan B if capital gains doesn't pass to address the regressivity portion of that?
You know, it's interesting because it's a kind of question that I usually don't like to answer, because you ask Pete Carroll, what if you don't win the Super Bowl? What are you going to do, tomorrow? I mean, that's not what we're planning on. No, we don't have any specific plan B. The reason we have suggested a capital gains tax is that we believe it is fairer than other kind of proposals to raise revenue. You don't raise taxes just for the fun of it. You only raise taxes when it's necessary because of constitutional and moral obligations. And as we talked about, doing the math, we're going to have to raise some revenues to fulfill what the people of the state of people want and deserve as far as services. So then the question is, how do you do that? Well, we have the most unfair system in the United States. And that's hard to say. But our lower income people, single mothers who work in a hospital or, a company making lower income, they pay 5 times more as a percentage of their income than people in the top quintile. 5 times more working people who are struggling to make ends meet. Now, it doesn't make sense to me, if you have to raise revenue, if you've got another option, why it isn't preferable to ask people at the very high income levels to chip in a little bit. So this is a proposal to ask about 1.5% of people in Washington to chip in a bit more. And I say a bit. This would only raise it up to a level that's kind of on the low end of the spectrum of the 42 other states that have a capital gains tax. So we would commend it for consideration by the legislature. It's both good for kids to have schools to pay that second installment of McCleary and all the other things that I've talked about. And it's better to do it in a fair way, and I think this does both.
Governor, on the capital gains tax, Republicans we spoke with earlier across the board said they did not like the idea. They fear it's a path towards an income tax. Senator Schessler brought up the idea of perhaps putting some sort of a limit on it so you couldn't increase the threshold or lower the threshold to become an income tax at some point. Is that something you've thought about? Would that perhaps get a few more votes? Right now, obviously, it doesn't sound like a lot of Republicans are on board with that.
Well, I'm not shocked at the Republicans' views in this regard, so it's not debilitating to our efforts. And, voters voted on what they wanted this year, too. They happened to vote for the blue team. And so I'm happy about that. But in answer to your question, yes, there is a limit. We set the limit. I'm proposing to set the limit in statute that it does not go below 1.5% of the population, and that's the limit. It's in law. And you can vote on that limit. You can proudly go home and talk to your constituents and say, to 98.5% of your constituents that they're not going to be affected by this capital gains tax, and that limit is in law. Now, 100 years from now, you know, are we going to tell legislators 100 years from now they can't consider something else? No, we can't and won't. But you can tell your people that's what you're doing. You know, I don't, this sort of camel's nose under the tent fear, I think we should work through because it has stymied so many other common sense things. That senator, I'm pretty sure, has made the same arguments that we shouldn't have background checks. Because if we have background checks, someday maybe we'll ban bump stocks. And that type of attitude has been very debilitating in our ability to move forward as a community. We ought to vote on the proposals that we have and not fear progress. Boy, maybe we should have voted against Social Security in 1936 because, geez, maybe someday we'd have health care reform. That would have been unwise. So I'm hopeful that people will embrace our opportunities in this regard. And I'm going to look forward to great bipartisan success with Senator Schessler. We have worked together, and I look forward to working together again. And I'll just note why I'm optimistic about that. I remember when people said we just couldn't get a transportation budget through the Senate when it was controlled by the Republican Party. And Senator Schessler said, geez, there's just what is it about no you don't understand, Governor? We passed the biggest transportation package in the history of the state. They can't build a birdhouse in D.C., and we did it on a bipartisan basis. So I'm looking forward to great bipartisan efforts in this regard. We had a great meeting this morning with Republicans and Democrats of these new members, and I think we can have some really good bipartisan success. I'll note on our behavioral health, I'm really pleased that at the moment there seems to be quite broad bipartisan view on the best way to reform our behavioral health system. And a number of the Republican leaders have spoken out that generally shows that we generally have the same vision of transforming the system to a more community-based system. And I think that bodes very well for our eventual success. Now, we may have difficulty figuring out, you know, what's the best way to pay for that. But that bipartisan vision is really gives me cause for optimism.
Governor, you mentioned the transportation package that was passed a couple years ago. There's talk that there's a need for another transportation package now to complete some of the major projects throughout the state, including a bridge over the Columbia River and places up in Snohomish County. So are you supportive of the legislature bringing you a package that might include a carbon tax or not, might include an increase in the gas tax? Are you supportive of another transportation package?
Well, I'm not shutting the door to that discussion. Clearly, there are some identifiable needs in our state. We have to replace the I-5 bridge over the Columbia River. It was just tragic that that was killed after we spent $156 million on it, getting ready to build it. And I'm encouraged that we should continue efforts. But we are going to have a partner in Oregon, and we're going to have leadership that recognizes it does take two to tango here, and we have to have an agreement about what components will be on that bridge. And so we have to get to that agreement to really move forward, then figuring out the financing package. So there's work to be done there before we move forward. There are numerous places in our transportation system where legislators have ideas, and I'm going to look forward to listening to them to see if there is the will to want to move forward with transportation. I've been willing to work hard on that, but I'm going to listen to their direction at the first instance.
We have time for 2 more questions. Governor, speaking of bipartisan work on mental health, would you support a proposal by Senate Republicans as Senator Braun's plan for a $500 million capital project program, basically putting it to the voters to bond it out?
I'm open to ideas like that. I would not say yay or nay at this moment. Obviously, bonding takes up your bonding capacity. And so when we use bonding authority for one thing, we reduce it for another. And we just need to think of that relationship. We need bonding capacity for housing. We need bonding capacity for schools. We just have to have the right mix in that regard. I don't think bonding can be seen as a panacea or an easy way out of a difficult thing, which is we got to have the revenues to support our state operations. So I want to keep an eye on that effort. I'm encouraged that Senator Braun is showing interest in making investments in our behavioral health system. It goes back to what I was talking about, that, and I had a good talk with him on his egg farm. And by the way, speaking of great products, thank you for the legendary donuts of Tacoma. We have the best donuts in the United States too. I just want to go on the record saying that. So thank you very much. So anyway, we'll be talking. Yes.
I have a question. I'd like to talk about the ortho recovery thing again. And I want to know whether commercial or overfishing could be, part of the problem, and if you would be considering a moratorium on fishing for a year or two to let the salmon population recover.
Well, as you know, we convened this broad-based stakeholder group to give me recommendations, and they have not suggested that specific total moratorium on fishing. But what we are doing, I think, in multiple venues, looking at ways on harvest to have appropriate harvest levels that do take in consideration orcas. That's why I'm glad, frankly, that we've already had a reduction in harvest, working with the Canadians, if you will. So there's already been a reduction of harvest, in part because of the orca population. We also have today discussions of the North of Falcon process, which is a co-management discussion between the states and the tribes to look at harvest levels as well. And that is appropriately something that should be discussed. So there are discussions ongoing about harvest levels, and there have been reductions already. The second point, when I asked scientists about this issue, it's not as simple as it may appear or appeared to me originally, because what they've told me is that sometimes shutting down a particular fishery or harvest doesn't really help the orcas, because the orcas have already left the area. They're not fishing in that area. They're not harvesting themselves. So if you shut down a fishery, right off the mouth of the Skagit River, but the orcas have already gone out to the Pacific Ocean, that doesn't really produce any more Chinook available for the orcas. So you do have to look at and listen to the scientists about that specific thing, but those discussions will be ongoing.
All right, last question.
We'll get them both. We'll get them both.
Governor, I want to ask you about the Interstate 5 bridge replacement. A lot of legislators from Southwest Washington have said they don't want light rail on it. They sent a letter to you. One legislator sent a letter saying they want a third bridge and no public transportation. Have you changed your views on having light rail on the bridge? And have you talked to Governor Keith Brown?
Well, I would push back on your assessment, because there's a lot of legislators who want a bridge and they're fine with light rail on the bridge. And the reason is they understand it would be great to give Southwest Washington residents a great way to tie into dozens, if not hundreds of miles of light rail on the other side of the bridge. And you don't have to get off a bus and then get on light rail. So there's a ton of legislative support for a bridge that does have light rail, and I'm very clear about that. And I am still extremely disappointed that the Republican Party killed the last bridge when we spent $150 million on it and we were ready to build it. I don't want to see that happen again. So what I have encouraged the parties to do is to try to come up with a consensus in Southwest Washington under what conditions do they want a bridge. Now, right now, those who don't want a bridge, if it has this sin of having a light rail on it, means we can't build a bridge. Because Oregon is insisting that they have light rail on it if they're going to pay for half the bridge. Now, if we paid for the whole thing, maybe we could do it, but that's not on the cards. So I am open to multiple systems of public transportation myself, and I've expressed this. I'm open to a bridge that might have light rail. I'm open to a bridge that might have rapid bus service. I am open to those myself. Personally, I believe a light rail solution is the best solution, because then you have this incredible asset. You get to use Oregon's 100 miles of light rail. That's a pretty sweet deal. And it's unfortunate that one of the parties down there has said, no, we don't want those people in Oregon coming over here. Those people. I think that those people thing is we've heard enough of that out of D.C. We'd like to be connected to the state of Oregon, not disconnected. So I'm open to other public transportation systems. But what I want to make clear, though, is that the Southwest Washington community needs to come together around a consensus. If at the moment, unless Oregon changes its view, we're going to have to put light rail on the bridge if we want a bridge. And until that changes, that is the situation. So the Southwest Washington community needs to either come together and say we're going to build a bridge like that, or we're going to do nothing until the cows come home. Now, I would prefer to build a bridge as soon as we can. But I've told them they need to work on that and develop a consensus. I got one more question here.
So I just want to get back to Essex's question, Governor. The specific criticism of your policy rollouts were that they're about Iowa and not about Washington. You just made the case that they're about Washington. So if they are, why go to Nevada and New Hampshire this month to talk about Washington State?
Well, listen, you can be assured that if I were going to have travels, I got a fantastic story to tell, unsurpassed by anywhere else in the country. And that's the story of Washington. How the Washington way can produce spectacular economic growth. How when you do the things we have done, best paid family leave, minimum wage, transportation infrastructure, big educational investments, gender pay equity, first net neutrality law in the United States, best voter rights, instead of suppressing votes, increasing the ability of people to vote. What do you get when you do those things? You get the best economy in the United States, the best GDP growth, the best job growth. You get named by Business Insider magazine as the best place to do business in the United States. That's a heck of a good story, and I'm proud to tell it. But we'll see what happens in that regard. I'm looking forward to this session. Thanks a lot.
All right, and that wraps up this year's AP Legislative Preview. Thank you so much for everyone for attending. If you have any questions about AP or about our coverage this session, feel free to stop by and chat with me or News Editor Chris Kriegel. Thank you.
TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. Washington's chief executive outlines his vision for the state. Watch Governor Jay Inslee's State of the State address delivered to a joint session of the House and Senate, followed by the Republican perspective on the 2019 legislature. Tuesday, January 15th at noon, live on TVW and live on the web at tvw.org. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Stream TVW video and audio anywhere, anytime with TVW's new mobile app.
This week on Inside Olympia, Washington has a
Connect with your state government through the TVW app, available free now at the App Store or Google Play. Download it and watch TVW anywhere.
Seattle Children's is working across Washington to protect youth from firearm tragedies. At Children's, we believe that we must approach firearm safety issues in direct collaboration with stakeholders representing wide-ranging views. It's why we helped found the Washington State Firearm Tragedy Prevention Network. As part of our effort, we've distributed over 5,000 free firearm storage devices at safety events throughout Washington State. Learn more at seattlechildrens.org.
Well, you know, here in Washington State, we're blessed with so many locations.
It's our natural environment, history. It just runs the gamut. So I hope that everyone enjoys my favorite places.
TVW now brings you state government in high definition. Thanks to Comcast, TVW is available in high definition on Comcast Channel 320 in most areas. On TV, online, on Facebook, on Roku, and now in HD. 4 ways TVW is bringing your state government to you. Every committee hearing, every floor debate. Watch every part of your 2019 state legislature on the web at tvw.org. We live stream all committee hearings and floor sessions in both the House and Senate. Miss a debate you wanted to see? We archive everything for on-demand viewing on our website. It's your state legislature. Catch it online at tvw.org. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government.
It's an icon to really the settlement and the growth of brewing, of industry in the state of Washington, but also very much an icon to settlement and growth and development in Thurston County.
Coming up next on TVW at Large, it's our second in a series of stories about projects that received funding from the state's capital budget. Our stop this time is a once very robust facility that is on track for a historic revitalization. Thank you for watching TVW at Large. I'm your host, Dave Martinson. For today's story, our second in our series about projects funded in part by the state's capital budget, we're in Tumwater to examine the restoration efforts of the old brew house.
There's a lot of great work that's happening down here.
Walking us through that great work being done at the brew house is John Doan, Tumwater's city administrator.
With the help of some donors and some volunteers and just terrific people within the community, we were able to put a temporary roof on the building to secure it and secure the windows, make sure people can't get into the property. And that's allowed us now the time to hire an architect, work with a designer for how we actually do the detailed work around the renovation and preservation of this entire structure.
The old brew house has fallen into disrepair as years have turned into decades since it was in operation.
We had a century of brewing history and tradition and heritage here, and that went away in 2003. And so, given the rise of craft brewing in the United States, craft distilling, craft cider making, we want to make this community a center for those industries and build on that legacy. And the iconic value of this building can really sort of be at the center of all of that redevelopment.
The brew house has received funding from the state's capital budget to make initial stabilizing improvements, with more help likely on the way.
There's a lot of enthusiasm about trying to make things happen here and fix this up. So we've received a lot of generous support from the state legislature through the Heritage Capital Grant Program. You know, we have a little over $500,000 in a grant from the last biennium, and we're highly rated going into the next biennium to receive additional funding. And so we're excited about moving forward with the design and ultimately the renovation of this building.
The construction goals for the brew house, as noted by the city of Tumwater, are broken down into 3 phases. Phase 1 is temporary protection of the structure, including a temporary roof, plywood reinforcements on the interior, as well as door and window security. Phase 2 involves a permanent roof, brick repair, cleanup of the historic site, as well as a ventilation system. Phase 3 calls for a full rehabilitation of the tower, more brick repair, a seismic retrofit of the structure, restoration of the interior, as well as all new doors and windows. Looking ahead, Doan provided a vision of what the future could hold for the old brew house.
You know, we're working on bringing small brewers, distillers, larger ones back into our community. We are partnering with South Puget Sound Community College on an education program that they have just started, an associate's degree program in brewing, distilling, and cider making. So there's a lot of really exciting things happening in the community, but again, this building is just really an icon that sort of represents bringing brewing back and that whole redevelopment strategy for this community.
Support for TVW at Large provided by the Washington Forest Protection Association and by the Arcora Foundation.
TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. TVW, opening state government to the people of Washington, with unedited coverage of the state legislature, the governor's office and executive branch, the state Supreme Court, state government agencies, campaigns and elections, and public policy events in all corners of Washington. Plus our award-winning produced shows and documentaries that offer in-depth, balanced coverage of political events and policy decisions. Thanks to the cable industry, TVW is carried statewide on cable TV and is also available on Roku and coming soon to other platforms. All of TVW's coverage, including every legislative committee hearing and floor debate from the state capitol, is streamed live at tvw.org. TVW's website also includes a vast historical archive of past legislative events and other public policy issues. TVW, opening government for the people of Washington. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Stream TVW video and audio anywhere, anytime from your Android or Apple device with TVW's new mobile app.
And welcome back to Inside Olympia. A recent study found that each year, 7 in 10 low...
Connect with your state government through the TVW app, available free now at the App Store or Google Play. Download it and watch TVW anywhere.
Support for TVW provided by...
At Wattle, we detect emerging diseases and develop new tests that keep both animals and people healthy.
In 10 years, we've conducted over 2.5 million tests. We've helped the U.S. recover from outbreaks such as bird flu and mad cow disease.
We've helped open global markets for Washington beef, fish, and poultry producers.
We believe in healthy labs, healthy animals, and healthy people.
The 2019 state legislature convenes at the state capitol January through April. Lawmakers will debate issues from mental health to carbon emissions, transportation to taxes. TVW opens your state legislature to you. We bring you every committee hearing, every floor debate, and press conferences from legislative leaders and the governor. Watch it all live on TVW and live streaming on demand anytime at tvw.org. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government.
The history of our state really has a lot of boom and bust stories, especially about mining. In the late 1800s, prospectors scattered all over Washington state, every river and creek and valley, looking for gold, looking for silver. This is one of those locations here in Bodie, Washington, way up near the Canadian border on the eastern side of our state. You have to wonder when you walk into a town like this, who built these buildings? Who lived here? What was their story and where'd they end up? Just from what remains today, you know it must have been an exciting life. Over $1 million in gold was taken out of this town in this one mine. And the people here say that the creeks still run color, meaning they believe that there's still valuable gold hidden in these hills. Ghost towns are always interesting places, and this is just one of the ghost towns in our state. This one is one of my favorite places.
Support for My Favorite Places provided by the Washington Hospitality Association and by Weatherly Inn, senior living where it's home and your family. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. TVW takes you back in time with historic Washington. Looking at the people, the places, the history, and the beauty of Washington's past. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW.
Support for The Impact provided by... Support for TVW provided by...
What does the future of our economy look like? It's the people of Washington State. Young, experienced, city and country, from Puget Sound to the Columbia River to the Inland Empire. Your neighbor, your coworker, your employee, your boss. So who is training the employees, the managers, the innovators, and the makers of our state's economy? Washington's community and technical colleges.
Laying up. It's taking the safer shot. It's not the exciting choice. No one fist bumps after laying up. It's tempting to go for it because you've made it so many times before. But what if you don't? Sometimes it's just not worth the risk. Here, you always lay up. Please don't drive distracted. It can wait.
Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Follow your state government on your time, on your device. From unedited coverage of state government to the programs you count on. TVW, watch it your way.
An in-depth look at decisions at the state capitol and how they impact you. This is The Impact.
Hello and welcome to TVW's coverage of the 2019 legislative session, the opening day live show. I'm Mike McClanahan here with new House Majority Floor Leader, Democratic State Representative Monica Stonier from Vancouver. Representative, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. This year, you're heading into session with a larger Democratic majority, and a lot more of your colleagues are women. How does that change the conversation in Olympia?
I think in a number of ways. Women have been excited about stepping up and running for office and are doing a lot more, pushing a lot more on some leadership roles in our communities. And so it's no surprise that now we're seeing the fruits of that work and seeing more women elected to legislative offices here at the state level, but also at the congressional level. I think it changes the dynamic and the conversation in a number of ways. We know that women have, incredibly strong purchasing power. So as consumers in the state, certainly a strong voice. We are, mothers or professional women or women who have taken up a huge passion on an issue largely impacted here at the legislature. So we're, I think, as a new majority of women, excited to get going on bringing that voice to the policy that we pass here.
Your background, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're an instructional coach at Pacific Middle School, and you focused a lot of legislation on K-12 schools, something you understandably know a whole lot about. The state superintendent is asking lawmakers to make big changes to the state education funding formula and allow cities and counties to raise more in local taxes for schools. Does that risk bringing about another lawsuit, considering the state just wrapped up the McCleary lawsuit highlighting inequitable funding and an inequitable funding formula between different schools and an over-reliance on local levies?
Well, I think one of the clarifications we got from the McCleary lawsuit was how those dollars should be spent. The state was not funding schools as we should have been, and now that we've kind of worked on righting that ship, I think now we're in a position to make better decisions with the resources to stay out of that legal trouble. So we'll continue working on that. I am an instructional coach. I was at Pacific for about 16 or 17 years, and that many years in one building gives you a lens for how state policy kind of shapes and moves through the system. I work now out of the district office. This is my second year working out of the district office, so I'm in several middle schools and high schools in my professional work as an instructional coach working with kids and teachers, and it's a broader view, and it certainly helps inform my work here in Olympia.
With all the different priorities heading into the session, funding for mental health, affordable housing, you name it, where does K-12 stack on the list of priorities as far as your priorities?
K-12 work is what brought me here in the first place, so it'll always be the work that I am most driven by. The joy of being a legislator is that you have the opportunity to work on a bunch of other things, and currently our K-12 system, our kids in our K-12 system are impacted by all of the other issues that you just mentioned. So I certainly see that as an opportunity to work here in Olympia on housing issues, on issues of poverty and income inequality. Those are all things that are going to impact our kids in schools and allow them to benefit from the investment the state has made in the K-12 system. So I think it all dovetails nicely.
So a different angle on this, are you planning to push for a simple majority vote to approve local school bonds?
I am. I have the proposal in my bag just up the hall here, and I'm waiting to collect a few more signatures from folks who are interested. I absolutely think that people in a community should be able to build schools for their kids by the same metric that I win an election by. The simple majority is something that's been a priority. I know that there are other proposals, and I know it'll be negotiated throughout this legislative session, but philosophically, I just think that a simple majority is the right thing to do.
And also, you want to bring Medicaid rates up to parity with Medicare rates to expand access to health care providers. Do we have any idea how much that will cost?
Currently, depending on how we adjust the proposal, the way the bill's written now, it's about $80 million to bring Medicaid rates to parity across the board. There are a couple behavioral health and some other interpretations of those rates that I'll have to look into to make sure we don't have to offer some clarification on that policy before it moves forward.
Healthcare seems to be a big topic, especially with the governor's plan to create a public option on the state health benefit exchange. Do you see that passing at this point? I know it's very early, but is that a big lift when you've got mental health, you've got schools, you've got various other priorities to deal with?
Yeah, it certainly is a big lift. I mean, I think anytime the state is facing a crisis like this, we have to take it seriously. I've been watching the news and interviews across the state, and it's very clear to me that there's strong bipartisan support to make some movement here. I also think I just came from a town hall on Saturday where folks are concerned about our over-reliance on property tax. So those conversations will happen concurrently, you know, how we go about funding our priorities and whether or not we can stay in line to make sure that those priorities are going to serve our community well. So it's going to require some investment, it's going to require negotiations, and fortunately I think some of the new demands that our state is facing are demands that every corner of the state can support.
When you have significantly larger Democratic majorities in both chambers, one might think, well, it'll be easy to pass progressive packages, progressive bills, Democratic priorities that may have only stalled in years past because of either Republican control of the Senate or very narrow control of the House. But in reality, how difficult is it to sort of manage a large caucus, and especially if there are perhaps more progressive, you might say, to the left, people from urban districts, and then you've got to sort of smooth things over with the moderate Democratic representatives, maybe from suburban districts or rural districts.
Yeah.
Is that a challenge?
It is a challenge. It's a challenge in a couple of ways, but I think one of the commitments that we've always had in our caucus is that we recognize people have a responsibility to represent their districts. So while we may have a greater majority, they may be people who are representing districts that may not share the same goals or the same positions as some of the other new members, as you mentioned. So we have to take into consideration the numbers might be there, but we all have a responsibility to represent our delegations or our constituency at home. And so that requires a lot of work on the ground, and you know, coming off a season of a lot of community engagement, I think folks are in tune with their communities, and so we'll see what we can get to as the proposals come up. But the numbers are better for some of those progressive issues, but again, it depends on how our new members are going to respond to them.
And along the same lines, as floor leader, what is your role, and do you plan on mixing things up any? Are we in for any surprises as far as how sort of wrangling the way that the floor is managed?
Yeah, I think in any situation, in any role that you're new to, it's very important to first learn the role in the way that it has been done successfully in the past, and then look for ways to do it your own way that you think can be improved. So I'm going to spend some time with Representative Tarleton and get a sense of, kind of how she's done that work. And I've had a couple conversations with Senator Elias on how he manages the floor. But most importantly, I think that my relationships with Republicans across the aisle that I hope I can depend on to just keep things moving along and getting good work done for the people of Washington.
Let's talk about your your portable benefits bill, rather. Speaker Chalk said that is a priority. What is the goal behind that?
The goal behind that is really to make sure that our workers who don't have access to benefits, health care, workers' compensation, whatever it is that they might need. A lot of folks are working multiple jobs and still not reaching that threshold where they have access to those benefits. And that, in turn, when they are injured on the job or run into some type of maybe medical, financial challenges, they oftentimes can end up, homeless or just in a position where it's harder to dig out of. So we want to make sure that more workers in our state have access to those benefits. Now that requires that we know exactly who is considered an employee and who's considered an independent contractor. So we're working on that kind of negotiation and conversation right now. It also means that we have to know who the workers are in our state. And a lot of the conversation so far has kind of centered around the drivers, platform drivers, rideshare businesses. But my interest is making sure that we're considering workers across the state, across industries, and across other fields that will help inform how to stand up a portable benefits program, be the first in the country that serves our state well. So,
and I kind of want to go back to sort of the beginning theme here as well. And the legislature's been dealing with sexual harassment, how complaints are handled, coming up with policies, procedures. How has the Me Too movement impacted business here in Olympia?
I think people are starting to recognize that there are allies, and speaking up is going to maybe result in more positive growth and movement than it maybe has in the past. The Me Too movement, I think, is unfortunately has been delayed by an inaction, and I'm proud of the work we've been doing here in the last year or so to really make sure that we include our staff, our members, people who do business here to help us understand what is needed. So we know we need to make sure people have a safe place to report. We know we need to make sure that there's accountability and some transparency around some of these issues. We also know we have to respect privacy. So it's a delicate balancing act, but I think we're really making some progress both here and in the Senate. I'm really proud of that.
I know you have a leadership meeting to get to. We've got about 30 seconds left. Any closing thoughts, anything I didn't ask that you'd like to add?
I just am thankful for the coverage, and I'm glad that there's a lot of buzz and excitement around what we're going to be doing this year, and I'm excited to get to work.
Thank you very much for your time, Representative Stonier. And still ahead, we'll speak with Senate Republican Caucus Leader Randy Becker. That's after the break. Stay with us.
Support for the impact provided by
Seattle Children's and the YMCA have teamed up to Act Healthy, a 3-month program designed to help children engage in healthy activities, eat healthy and nutritious foods, and decrease their chance of diet-related health issues. Seattle Children's has developed the ACT program at more than 20 YMCA locations around the state. So far, over 5,000 children and their families have learned how to live a healthy, active lifestyle through better nutrition and exercise. More information at seattlechildrens.org.
Washington's chief executive outlines his vision for the state. Watch Governor Jay Inslee's State of the State address delivered to a joint session of the House and Senate, followed by the Republican perspective on the 2019 legislature. Tuesday, January 15th at noon, live on TVW and live on the web at tvw.org. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org.
Hi, I'm Austin Jenkins. Join me on TVW's Inside Olympia for interesting guests and in-depth interviews on the issues you care about. Watch us each week on TV or online at tvw.org.
Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. TVW thanks the cable television industry. Cable providers across the state carry TVW for free as a public service, enabling Washingtonians to watch their state government in action. Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org. Follow your state government on your time, on your device, from unedited coverage of state government to the programs you count on. TVW, watch it your way. TVW, opening state government to the people of Washington, with unedited coverage of the state legislature, the governor's office, and the state Supreme Court, state government agencies.
Welcome back to TVW's live coverage of the start of the 2019 legislative session. I'm joined by the Senate Republican Caucus Chair, Senator Randy Becker. Senator, thank you for sharing your time with us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
First question I'd like to ask, this year, the Senate Republican leadership, there are more women in leadership positions than men. What are the significant implications of that dynamic?
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm really tickled that we have 8 women in the caucus, and of the 8 women, there's 6 that are in leadership. And I think that what that means is that we have women that are very thoughtful and the caucus respects. I think that when you look at the top 4 leadership, 3 of them are women, and Senator Shessler, of course, is the leader. I think that it's just another way of representing women in politics, but I think that it shows the respect of the entire caucus that they have with women. I think that as far as the dynamics, I think you'll see pretty much the same process that we have right now working through as far as when we caucus and everybody's opinions are heard.
And let's talk a little bit about your role as caucus chair. What are some of the primary functions, and also what do you bring to the table for this leadership role?
Well, I have 20-some years of administrative background, so I think it helps me bring the group together in ways that we hadn't before. And as caucus chair, what I do is I lead the caucus meetings. I set the agenda for what we do in those meetings, and then as we are going through the process when the bills are coming up, I lead which bills we're going to talk about. And then, of course, I'm with Senator Shessler as he is in his leadership role, meet with the governor, et cetera. And so it's pretty involved.
Speaking of the governor's got a proposal for a public option on the state healthcare exchange. You come from a career in the healthcare field as an administrator. I believe you ran a surgical center in Puyallup. What's your take on the governor's proposed public option plan?
Well, the public option plan that I am aware of that he's bringing forward is actually something that I have huge concerns about. Number one, it's government-led insurance, and it's who's going to pay for that insurance. It's going to be subsidized through the taxpayers or through fees to the carriers. And that is something that I have a huge concern. I think that we need to have more insurance options, but is this the right option? I'm not sure. Again, he is offering to have the services paid for at Medicare rates, which are some of the lower rates in the entire nation. And I don't know that he'll be able to get providers to actually accept those rates in order to see the patients. It's kind of setting up another Medicaid, Medicare type of reimbursement, and doctors cannot stay in business with that kind of reimbursement.
One of the priorities that your caucus outlined really a couple of months ago has to do with mental health, the mental health sort of crisis in Washington state, and you're proposing, I believe, $500 million bond measure to fund mental health initiatives here. Talk about what you'd like to see and the rationale behind that.
So what you're talking about on the bond measure is a Senator Braun's bond measure. That's hard to say. And it would go to a vote of the people, and it's for $500 million to create new facilities for treating people with mental illness. But I think that you've hit something that is really near and dear to me in the mental health issue, and that I have been working on telemedicine to get access and care out to people that need it throughout the state of Washington, whether they live in a city, a suburban area, or in a rural area. But this year I actually have a bill that will be bringing mental health into the schools for our children, for those that are at risk for suicide, for at risk for harming others, for those that may have just an episode of needing some guidance through some situational depression, etc., but for opioid and substance abuse. And this is something that I'm very excited about because I'm incorporating interactions with the University of Washington Psychiatry Department, training people in schools, etc. So stay tuned, watch for that. Mental health is a growing problem, not just here in Washington, but around the country, and homelessness. And if we don't address those two issues, we have been more remiss than anything in the state of Washington. We put McCleary first, getting that resolved. This is the year to really focus on mental health. And one thing that we have to remember in all of our healthcare systems that we do, we have to put the patient first. We have to think that this is about making the patient well, not just making good patients, but actually getting results and helping making them well. It's been pointed out we'll not make everyone well. We will lose people to death and to long-term commitments, but this is focused on, we need to focus on the patient when we're talking about healthcare.
DSHS requested funding for a new facility to replace the aging Western State Hospital. Western State was decertified last year. It's $50 million in federal funding, a year lost. What are your thoughts on that proposal, and do you see that being a top priority, or addressing Western State? Is that part of mental health?
So Western State has been a problem for multiple years, and I was on the committee trying to look at helping Western State work through those deficiencies that they had. The problem that I see is that no matter, I think you need a new building. I do. I think you need to look at criminal and forensic patients differently than each other. But I also think that you need to realize that a new building and putting more money and putting more staff in it will not correct that problem. We will continue with having deficiencies and having problems there unless the governor starts to put this as a #1 focus. And I say that because the deficiencies were broadly affecting the whole environment of Western State Hospital. They were #1, they had to do with the facility, but #2, they had to do with documentation, nursing staff interactions, safety issues. It was the whole gambit. And unless you address that whole gambit, a new building will not solve that problem.
Looking at the governor's proposal, $54 billion and change, with more than $3 billion in new revenue from raising certain existing taxes and creating a new capital gains tax. What's your perspective on that?
So we have had record revenue coming into the state of Washington, and we have had more money than what has been projected coming into this state. What is it that we need to do that means that we have to increase yet more tax burden on the middle income, those people that are actually out there working so hard, trying to live in their homes and work and do a good job? I do not believe that we need a capital gains tax. I do not believe that we need an additional burden on businesses that are employing these people for increases in B&O taxes. I do not believe that we need additional excise taxes on when people are selling their homes. As it affected me this year, I can only imagine what it would do to somebody else. I look at what this governor has done in the 8 years is increased his budget by $28 million, which was what our budget was over the last 100+ years. We do not need to do that. We need to focus on what we need to do within our budget so that when the next recession hits, we can still maintain. We need to be responsible.
The last election was brutal for Puget Sound Republicans. Basically, no statewide electeds from King County. What can the Republican caucus do as a strategy to rebuild?
One correction, Senator Fortunato still represents part of King County.
I stand corrected. Forgive me.
That's all right. I think that we need to still stand up for the fact that we represent the people, and we represent those people that that are in the state of Washington, regardless whether they need help, whether they are middle income or whether they're high income. We need to focus on the individual that is getting overly burdened with taxes to support all of the other programs that are supporting people that are not necessarily giving back to our community. We need to focus on getting jobs out there, which are available, by the way. I see on signs everywhere, we have a need for workers here, we have a need for workers here. Now we need to get those people out into those jobs. I think that will help people realize and take the pride they used to have in working, and realize that Republicans are out there trying to help them just as Democrats are.
There are a number of transportation proposals that rumors are kind of swirling around. I haven't seen the actual bill, but there's talk of a proposal that might pop up in the Senate related to transportation funding via a carbon tax. I don't know if you've heard about this, but if you have any thoughts about that, what's your first blush opinion about the concept?
Well, my first flush opinion is it's another attack that the people of the state of Washington have already said they don't want a carbon tax. So they'll just come and try to do it from another perspective. My district, I'm really tickled to say, is Representative Barkas is ranking on transportation in the House, member of my district. The thing that I think that the 2nd Legislative District folks would say is, no, I don't want to pay a carbon tax. I drive to King County every day to go to work, and I'm going to be penalized to try to go to work. I think that we, again, have to realize that people have been taxed enough.
When you're the minority and heavily democratically dominated legislature, both chambers, the governor's office, just basically outnumbered, how does the minority throw its weight around?
Well, you know, when I was chair of healthcare, I believed very strongly that I needed to communicate and share everything that was happening with my Democratic counterparts, and to make them have the same amount of weight in hearing a bill and focusing on those bills. Of course, there were some that we knew we wouldn't pass, but we shared that with them. I think that we still have to work with the Democratic Party, but we need to not just be on the defensive, we need to be on the offensive like we have. We need to be talking about our housing issues. We need to be talking about the homeless issues. We need to be talking about mental health. Not just talking about them, but we need to be bringing, as a number of us are, well thought out bills forward that the Ds have to consider just as they would their own.
What do you see as the biggest areas for likely compromise in the Senate this year, based on what you've heard so far?
I think that we're going to have to look at each and everything that comes forward. As you know, and I just said, I cannot support a capital gains tax. I can't see me coming to a compromise easily on that unless it was something that was specific. Our entire caucus would have to look at where we want to compromise on what particular items.
What do you think are the biggest points of contention so far?
The tax increases. Tax increases, I think, would be the biggest area of contention. I think that there are going to be differences when we look at McCleary and the K-12 system, when we look at the things that, rather than tweaking McCleary, I'm hearing that they would like to rewrite McCleary, you know, the K-12. And I don't want us to go back into that situation. That's over 51% of our budget and our K-12 system. And I can see fixing special education. I can see looking at and working through the regionalization issues. And I think that's where we'll be able to compromise and make some good decisions.
On that topic, the proposals to increase the local property levy lid, what are your thoughts about that? I know traditionally there's been some resistance to that, especially Senate Republicans during the negotiation process said that had to change, that was a core part of the McCleary lawsuit. Democratic representatives, senators say no, it wasn't. What do you think?
I believe it was an essential part of the McCleary decision, and by creating that one standard levy amount throughout the entire state of Washington, 70% of the districts saw a decrease in their levy funding, and the state backfilled that amount of money. I think that it's critical that that levy stays the same as it is at this point in time. I think that we have to, if we're going to increase it, it would have to be only increased to the amount that it was the same for everybody in the state of Washington, as McCleary has already said.
We're almost out of time. Any final thoughts, thing I didn't ask that you'd like to add?
I just I'm looking forward to this year. I'm looking forward to some of the proposals that our members have, but I'm looking forward to some of the proposals that we have to actually decrease. For example, I have a bill that's going to decrease the property taxes for seniors in addition to the veterans and to the disabled, and I think that that's something that with these record amounts of revenue that we have, we need to start saying thank you to the taxpayer and giving something back.
Senator Becker, we're out of time. Thank you very much for sharing your time and insight with us this morning, and still ahead we've got a lot more to come, so stay with us. We'll be back after a break.
Support for The Impact provided by Support for TVW provided by WSECU.
WSECU was founded by public employees, and since 1957 we've been returning the favor and honoring them. We're here today at Public Service Recognition Week. This is one of the ways that we give back not only to our members, but also all public employees who make Washington such a great state to live in.
State Supreme Court Justice Mary Fairhurst delivers the State of the Judiciary address to a joint session of the State Senate and House of Representatives. Wednesday, January 16th at 11 a.m. Watch it live on TVW and live on the web at tvw.org. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW.
During the 2019 legislative session, join me, Dave Martinson, for Legislative Review. Broadcasting on TV at 8 and 11 p.m. as well as online at tvw.org, we cover the legislative issues that matter most, from the Capitol to your living room. From the work session to the bill signing, we've got you covered.
Give Amazon a smile and support TVW. TVW is now a registered charitable organization with Amazon Smile. To support TVW, place your Amazon orders through smile.amazon.com. Then select TVW as your charity, and the Amazon Smile Foundation will donate a portion of the price of eligible purchases to TVW. It's an easy way to support TVW with your everyday online shopping. TVW and Amazon, bringing your state government to you. Want to keep up on what lawmakers are doing in Olympia? Find out. Turn to TVW. Through unedited coverage and in-depth interviews, TVW examines how decisions at the state capitol affect issues that impact you. Schools, universities, transportation, taxes, state parks, and prisons. On TV and online, the in-depth coverage you won't find anywhere else is on TVW. Stream TVW video and audio anywhere, anytime from your Android or Apple device with TVW's new mobile app.
And welcome back to Inside Olympia. A recent study found that each year 7 in 10 low...
Connect with your state government through the TVW app, available free now at the App Store or Google Play. Download it and watch TVW anywhere. TVW, opening state government to the people of Washington, with unedited coverage of the state legislature, the governor's office, the state Supreme Court, state government agencies, campaigns and elections, and public policy events in all corners of Washington. Plus our award-winning produced shows and documentaries that offer in-depth, balanced coverage of political events and policy decisions. TVW, opening government for the people of Washington. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government.
Coming up next, they serve as a voracious warning system in the event of an emergency, and thanks to grant funding, there will be more of them in Washington. That and much more coming up on TVW at Large right now. Thank you for watching TVW at Large. I'm your host, Dave Martinson. Today's story is all about tsunami preparation, an area of concentration that just received nearly $750,000 in funding. A grant totaling $725,822 stands ready to bolster the tsunami preparedness in the Evergreen State. The Washington State Military Department's Emergency Management Division received the Tsunami Activities Grant from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and National Weather Service. Right off the bat, the grant will increase the number of tsunami warning sirens in Washington from 72 to 74 by the end of 2018.
The sirens, in ideal conditions where you've got 70-ish degree weather and the winds aren't blowing, it's a 1-mile radius from the siren. And these are meant to alert people that are outdoors. They're on the beach, they're in the coastal zone. So not when you're sitting in your house watching TV, but when you're outside. So we're looking at really, they're about $60,000 a piece. And so we're slowly working on them, and we have a few left to go, but we've done really well over the last 10 years or so.
Funding from the grant will help in the evolution of critical evacuation maps.
When you have an evacuation map, it's great because it shows routes, how do you get out to high ground, to get out of the risk zone as quickly as possible, but also what it does is it takes into consideration walk times. So how long does it take people to actually walk out of the zone, and depending on where you are. And oftentimes there's barriers, so there can be landslides, there can be things that can block roads, so we take that into consideration and looking at where people can gather, and just getting them out of high ground as quickly as possible.
As many Washingtonians have seen, tsunami evacuation route signs are a common sight in coastal regions. Funds from this tsunami activity grant will help ensure the accuracy and condition of the road signs.
Unfortunately, people steal signs. There's wear and tear, obviously, the environment with the salt water. What we do is we add more signs or we change some of the routes because, roads have changed or certain conditions have changed. So sometimes we have to reroute the evacuation routes.
While the grant was awarded to the Washington Military Department's Emergency Management Division, there is a lot of collaboration with other agencies and entities.
We manage the grant for Washington State, here at Washington State Emergency Management Division, but we then subcontract out or subaward to the Department of Natural Resources, University of Washington, different folks who are actually doing some of these projects.
Looking ahead to a potential disaster situation, Dixon indicated it's critical for Washingtonians to take it upon themselves to be prepared.
So the biggest challenge is actually getting people to take action. they know about the tsunami risk, they know about there's a tsunami hazard, and generally speaking, they know where to get some information. It's just getting people to practice their tsunami evacuation routes, to, build their go bags so they can take them with them, understanding and looking at the updated tsunami inundation zones, having a family emergency plan, making sure that they can get alerted through NOAA weather radios. So these things, it's a lot to do, and you do it a little bit at a time, but I would say that would be the biggest challenge.
Support for TVW at Large provided by the Washington Forest Protection Association and by the Arcora Foundation.
TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. TVW, opening state government to the people of Washington, with unedited coverage of the state legislature, the governor's office and executive branch, the state Supreme Court, state government agencies, campaigns and elections, and public policy events in all corners of Washington. Plus our award-winning produced shows and documentaries that offer in-depth, balanced coverage of political events and policy decisions. Thanks to the cable industry, TVW is carried statewide on cable TV and is also available on Roku and coming soon to other platforms. All of TVW's coverage, including every legislative committee hearing and floor debate from the state capitol, is streamed live at tvw.org. TVW's website also includes a vast historical archive of past legislative events and other public policy issues. TVW, opening government for the people of Washington. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Stream TVW video and audio anywhere, anytime from your Android or Apple device with TVW's new mobile app.
And welcome back to Inside Olympia. A recent study found that each year 7 in 10 low...
Connect with your state government through the TVW app, available free now at the App Store or Google Play. Download it and watch TVW anywhere.
As much as 75% of what we use every day comes through a port. 75%. For us, that means a lot of the cars we love. Just about all the malt for all the craft beer made in America. Enough wheat to feed a small country. Recyclables, consumer goods, food products, building materials, and much more. Add it all up, and we're 110% happy to call this port home.
Hi, I'm Austin Jenkins. These days it can be tough to find in-depth, meaningful discussions about the public policy issues you care about, like schools, traffic, policing, or healthcare. But that's what we give you each week here on TVW's Inside Olympia program. You can watch us each week on TV or online at tvw.org. And thank you for watching.
Visit and like TVW's Facebook page to keep up to date on our coverage of the legislature, Supreme Court, and more. Our daily coverage memos let you know what we're covering and how we're covering it, whether it's on TV, online, or both. Plus, you'll get previews of our special programs from Inside Olympia and The Impact to TVW at Large and My Favorite Places with Ralph Monroe. The TVW Facebook page, a great way to follow your state government on TVW. Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org.
Support for The Impact provided by Support for TVW provided by
Washington's community and technical colleges are building the future of our state's economy. On average, our students earn back almost 3 times what they put in. That means that a student here can study for an in-demand field here and get a high-paying local job here, or here, or here. When it comes to the future of our economy, nothing matters more than filling Washington jobs with Washington residents, and no one is doing that better than Washington's community and technical colleges.
Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Follow your state government on your time, on your device. From unedited coverage of state government to the programs you count on. TVW, watch it your way.
Welcome back to TVW's live coverage of the start of the 2019 legislative session. I'm joined now by House Democratic Majority Leader, Representative Pat Sullivan. Representative, thank you for being here.
You bet.
This year, you're heading into the session with a much broader, larger majority in the House. There's also a larger Democratic majority in the Senate. With a broader Democratic majority in both chambers and a Democratic governor, what do your constituents expect to see passed?
Well, I think they expect us to do our job. There are a lot of issues that we have to deal with this session, from mental health to education. Typically, most bills that pass the legislature are bipartisan. That will continue. But there's always a few bills that tend to be a little bit more partisan.
There have been some, I would say, more progressive proposals from some of the recently elected Democratic legislators than perhaps we might have seen in the past. Some people have campaigned on things like health care for all, for expanded social services, that sort of thing. The governor's proposing a free college tuition plan for the state, proposing a public option for health care, not to mention hundreds of millions of dollars for mental health, $1 billion for ORCA recovery, et cetera. Which of these proposals line up clearest with the House Democratic majority, and which of these do you think may not pass?
Well, we're going to go through our regular process. All those issues will go to the committees that they'll be referred to, and then after they're passed out of committees, we'll have a caucus on those bills. But it's too early to tell. I think that the governor's on the right path. I think that many of the things that he included in his budget and policy proposals are things that are strong Democratic proposals. So we're excited. We're ready to get started, and I think with our majorities right now, we'll get our work done.
When you've got a large Democratic majority, a large caucus, the outward appearance might be that it would be easy to pass all sorts of legislation that in previous years may not have passed due to divided control of the Senate and House, or slim minorities in each chamber. This year that's not the case, but is it true that it's easier to pass things, or is it in fact difficult to wrangle votes when you've got a large diverse caucus with a lot of different constituents from very different areas?
Well, again, a majority of the bills that pass, I don't think people understand, really are bipartisan bills. 90%, probably more than 90% are bipartisan bills. And as far as, I guess, passing those that are a little bit more controversial, we saw it last year with very slim majorities in both the House and the Senate. Issues like breakfast after the bell, voter registration bills that were bogged down in the Senate in the past with a Republican leadership, we were able to get through this past year. I think that same kind of effort will continue this next year. But, you know, every bill that comes before the legislature, it's much easier to kill a bill than it is to pass one.
As the House Majority Leader this year, what are your top priorities?
Mental health funding and policies it will be the top priority of our caucus this year. I think there's no question about that. Homelessness, K-12 education, continuing to work on the reforms that were passed just a few years ago, higher education, early learning. I think many of them are the same issues that we've made some progress over the past several years, but we need to continue to make progress.
There's been much discussion about the tax structure in the state, from the idea that it's regressive to the increased property tax burden for people who live in more expensive property districts. And I know that in the past, both chambers, Democratic majorities of both chambers, have tried to restructure some taxes, including possibly the sort of the backbone of the recent education agreement, the McCleary agreement, which rides largely on a state property tax increase. Do you think that we will see significant tax restructuring this year?
Well, thanks to the Democrats last year, actually, this year citizens across the state will see a 30 cents per thousand reduction in their state property tax. Many will also see a reduction in their local school levies. So there will be some property tax relief during the 2019 year. As far as the tax structure is concerned, you know, the governor has a number of proposals that we'll take a look at. But, you know, we have to first go into our budget, and we go in line by line, go through every section of that budget, scour it for ways to become more efficient. Then at the end, we take a look at revenue, if that's needed, in order to ensure that we can have a quality budget that moves our state forward. So we go through that same process every year, and we'll do that again this year.
This year, the governor's proposed a capital gains tax. There are some legislators who've openly backed a capital gains tax. Do you support a capital gains tax?
Well, our budget in the House the last several years has included a capital gains excise tax, and I think that there's a majority in our caucus that would continue to support that. So I would say that would be on the top of the list.
Do you think this is the year that passes?
We'll see. I hate to make predictions. I think that that tax is broader. I mean, it actually impacts a very small percent of our state, those that have more resources that they can afford to help provide for the services that our constituents want. It'll make our system a little bit more equitable. So I think there's a good chance that will at least rise to the top.
With the governor's $54.4 billion budget, again, increased spending for a laundry list of goals, public health care option, free college tuition program, more funding for K-12 and higher ed, worker recovery, mental health. Where are the bipartisan areas that you see agreement on, and where do you think there will be big points of contention?
You know, I think for the most part, in all those areas, there should be bipartisan agreement that we need to move forward. We've had many conversations, especially around mental health. There's a broad agreement that we need to do something substantial this session. In K-12 education, you know, I think that we can get bipartisan agreement on some changes that need to be made. Special ed primarily is one issue that I think we've all agreed that we need to put more resources into. So, you know, I think that there are many areas where we have more agreement than disagreement. I guess the bottom line is we have to, it's how you get to that point where we get a solution, and hopefully we can get there together.
The state superintendent and the governor both are pushing for increasing the local property tax levy lids for communities to allow them to raise more money. There's been some opposition, especially from some Republican legislators, who say that could put the state back in the same place it was when the McCleary lawsuit was filed, in that there was an inequitable funding formula for schools across the state. How do you avoid winding up back in court if students who live in more expensive districts can raise more money for their schools than students who live in maybe rural districts or areas where property is less expensive?
So, you know, the key is that we can't allow those local levy dollars to go for basic ed purposes. And in the bill that we passed 2 years ago, we put restrictions on how those levy funds could be used. They're only for enhancements. That has to continue. We can't ease up on that. And as long as those dollars are used for enhancements, the Supreme Court hasn't ruled that we have to cap levies at any certain percentage. There is an equity issue, I think, as you stated, but that's why we have levy equalization, to ensure that property poor districts get at least some funding from the state to help them have those same types of enhancements that property rich districts are able to get.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is there will be about $50 billion heading into the budget planning session. I know that obviously with the governor's proposal would go above and beyond that, requesting additional revenue from existing taxes, tweaks to those and increases, plus the new capital gains tax. Again, Republicans say that the state should live within its means, not raise taxes, and with $50 billion and, being in good financial footing, not to dip into reserves and to reinvest or even use that money for tax cuts. Where do you see that? Do you see that as an area for bipartisan agreement? Well, the Republicans are also pushing for more funding for special education, for mental health coverage, for broadband, for a number of things that they want to see as priorities. And those all cost money. So in the end, when we adopt our budget, if it requires revenue, I hope that we can get together on an agreement on how we move forward. But I think both sides agree that there are things that need to be accomplished this session, and unfortunately, they do cost money. When you have a caucus with members from maybe more progressive, let's say to the left, urban districts, and then also some maybe more moderate suburban or rural districts, are there going to be some proposals that might be dangerous votes for some of those members? I mean, how do you wrangle that as a majority leader? I think every member has to decide for themselves whether it's something they can support or not, whether it's something that their community supports. We have a lot of conversations about, is this something that your community would support? Is this something you should vote for? But it just depends upon the issue. And when the time comes, we will have those conversations, and we'll see where the votes are. But everybody here has to vote their own conscience. Looking at environmental legislation, what issues do you think would be a top priority for your caucus? I think a 100% clean energy bill. Representative Fitzgibbon is taking the lead as the chair of the Environment and Energy Committee. He's got a number of proposals that he's going to move forward. Low carbon fuel standard. We'll see where those go. Like I said, it's got to go through his committee and then to rules and then on to our probably to appropriations committee. So there's a number of hurdles that they have to clear, but there'll be a lot of conversation about all those issues. What about guns? I know there were measures passed last legislative session, and then some that weren't, which went to initiative, and then some of those proposals passed at the statewide level. Do you see firearms legislation as a big priority or a cornerstone of this year's Democratic agenda? Well, we'll see what's introduced. At this point, I've only seen one bill. That's a bill that allows the State Patrol to get rid of guns that are taken in. But I don't know what the range of bills that might come before us. But again, we'll see what comes to the top by the time that over the next probably 2 weeks we'll see 1,000 bills introduced. So we'll sort through them. Now, last year was a short session, so to speak, but the pace was frenetic. There were so many bills. As a person that tries to follow the legislature, it was difficult. Do you expect to see a similar pace this year? I think last year was because of a lot of those bills that got bogged down in the Senate in the past, like breakfast after the bell. We passed that bill probably a dozen times over the last 5 years, and it was always killed in the Senate. So there was a pent-up demand to get these bills that had been clogged in the Senate to the governor's desk, and so that's why the pace was pretty fast. This session, I don't think it'll be quite as fast, but there are a lot of issues that we need to get done, and even in 105 days with the budget, we got to roll up our sleeves and get the work done. Do you see us getting out on time this year? Yes, 105 days we need to get done. We've got just about 2 minutes left. Final thoughts? Anything I didn't ask you that you think is important to add? Any surprises this year? We have 12 new members in our caucus, and they're extraordinary. I mean, it's been great to get to know them. They're excited about getting started. Every 2 years, or actually every year now, depending upon if there are retirements or people moving on to other things, you have new members. And this class of new members are probably one of the best that we've ever seen. A diverse group, all eager to pass bills and be part of this process that the public expects and demands that we get our work done. And with just going back to a question I was asking Majority Floor Leader Stonier earlier, how do you think that the Me Too movement has changed Olympia? I know there's been legislative work around dealing with sexual harassment, coming up with new policies. There's been a lot of activity there. Where are we in that process as far as where's the legislature? Well, I think, there's been a separate process in both the House and the Senate. In the House, we had a work group that made recommendations. We're going through those recommendations right now.
I think the House and Senate have both agreed upon a code of conduct that we need to adopt. So I think there have been a number of positive steps forward, but the work needs to continue. There's no question about that. We want to make sure that anybody who works in the legislature, who visits the legislature, feels safe in this environment and that they're able to do their work free of any kind of harassment or other activity that is unwarranted.
Well, with just under a minute left, I just want to ask, what are your personal predictions for the first bills to pass this year? I know there's been some movement around tweaks to I-940, the deadly force initiative that did pass in the general election. Is that at the top of the list?
I would say that's at the top of the list. You know, we passed that bill last year at the very end of session. It was struck down by the Supreme Court. Roger Goodman, Representative Goodman's put a lot of work into that effort, as well as both the communities who have sponsored the initiative and law enforcement all coming together to try to get that bill passed. And I see that should be one of the earlier bills that we get done.
Well, we're out of time, but thank you very much for sharing your time on this opening day of the legislative session. House Majority Leader Sullivan, it's been a pleasure.
You bet. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll be back after the break with Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig. Stay with us.
TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. Washington's chief executive outlines his vision for the state. Watch Governor Jay Inslee's State of the State address delivered to a joint session of the House and Senate, followed by the Republican perspective on the 2019 legislature. Tuesday, January 15th at noon, live on TVW and live on the web at tvw.org. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW.
Support for TVW provided by...
While we are seeing great prosperity and growth in our region, we are also seeing huge gaps, income inequality.
Port of Seattle has made a huge impact on my apprenticeship. This is where I grew up for my apprenticeship program. The Port of Seattle has provided both a lifestyle and a career. It was literally the best decision I have ever made.
Hi, I'm Austin Jenkins. Join me on TVW's Inside Olympia for interesting guests and in-depth interviews on the issues you care about. Watch us each week on TV or online at tvw.org.
Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. TVW thanks the cable television industry. Cable providers across the state carry TVW for free as a public service, enabling Washingtonians to watch their state government in action. Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org. Follow your state government on
Welcome back to TVW's live coverage of the start of the 2019 legislative session. Joining me now, Democratic Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig. Thank you for being here today, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So let's start with this. You're an Eastern Washington lawmaker in a top leadership position. People often talk about the Cascade Curtain or the urban-rural divide. How significant is it to have Eastern Washington represented at the highest levels of the legislature?
Well, I'm incredibly proud to represent the community of Spokane in the state Senate. But really, we always try to legislate for the state as a body and as a legislature. And one of the things I love is when you sit in the Senate chamber, around the rim of the chamber are the names of all 39 counties. And I think the people, our predecessors who built this building, this magnificent building, they had something very specific in mind to put those counties all up there right in the chamber, so we're facing them while we're on the floor making laws, so that we don't forget that we're there representing the whole state. So I think it's great to have Eastern Washington leadership, but I think we always try to work on behalf of all the citizens of our state.
Well, you're heading into this session. Democrats now hold a 28-21 majority in the Senate. Just last year, that power split was much more narrow, 25 to 24. And this year, House Democrats have gained a significant numerical advantage as well. With the broader majority, what do your constituents expect you to pass?
Well, one of the secrets about Olympia that a lot of people don't know is that most of what we do is bipartisan. And I was impressed when I first came to the legislature 8 years ago to see how much collaboration and bipartisanship that there is here. And it's one of the reasons that the state legislature here is effective and productive. And so that won't change. We'll still do that, whether it's 25, 24, 28, 21. Certainly it gives us a little flexibility. It helps when somebody's out sick that we can still get the work of the Senate done. But for the most part, we're working together across the aisle to figure out those solutions that are best for everybody in Washington State. And some of the things particularly we'll be working on is clean air and clean water, which is important to everybody in our state and to certainly the future of our planet. Really going to be focused on mental health funding and looking at smart solutions in mental health, housing affordability and stability, and of course investing in great schools. And in K-12 this year particularly, I think we're going to be looking at improvements in the special education system.
Now, the governor's budget does reference a number of those, maybe all of those, but also goes further. It's $54.4 billion budget, increased spending for basically a laundry list of goals: a public health care option, free college tuition program, not to mention about $1 billion for ORCA recovery. Out of that list of big ticket items, do you see all of them passing, or where do you think there's the greatest opportunity for collaboration and support?
Yeah, I really appreciate the governor put out a bold proposal and really hit on the important issues that we do need to make progress on in Washington State this year. I don't know that we'll get everything done. I don't know that we have the resources to get everything done, but that is really what this 105-day session that starts today is all about, so that we can work through that, find the right balance and the right priorities. But I mean, everything you mentioned are our priorities in Washington State, and we know if we invest in these things, if we invest in early learning, if we're investing in mental health, if we're investing in great education, we know that those are investments that actually pay dividends down the road. So they not only make great sense in terms of improving quality of life and building opportunity and prosperity for the people of Washington State, but they actually make good fiscal sense because in the long term, they actually pay back a return to the taxpayers.
Some of the ideas, I mean, public option, health care for all, free college tuition, those are very progressive. Those are maybe to the left of the types of platforms we typically see in recent years when power was more narrowly divided in the legislature. Now with the larger caucus, perhaps more diverse caucus as well, when you've got members in your caucus that maybe represent more progressive urban areas and then some maybe more moderate rural suburban Democrats, how do you manage that there are different priorities, or when there are different priorities, if something comes up for a vote, could it be dangerous for one or the other?
Those are certainly things we think about, but I really think about things related to people of Washington State more than to the individual senators. And some of those issues, like I'll use public option for health care as an example. To me, that is not an extreme idea or a radical idea. That's actually that's a very popular idea. I mean, when you go out and talk to voters, to citizens, when you look at polling, you know, creating more options for high quality, affordable access to health care, that's something everybody wants. Whether you're a small business owner looking out for your employees or you're an individual looking out for your family, that's something that's really important. So I don't think that that's really to the extreme. I think that's something that we can really work together on and find broad support for.
Now, the State Medical Association, the head of the State Medical Association, kind of warns that, you know, if we were to set a public option at Medicare rates, that Medicare only pays on average about 70% of private insurance options, and that it might be difficult for some providers to make their overhead. Therefore, even though there'd be more people covered, it would be harder to access health care. What do you say to that?
Well, access is important. So whatever plan we come up with, if we do end up passing something, it's got to be, we have to make sure that it works in practice. And so if that means that a certain rate is going to work or a certain rate isn't going to work, we need to make sure we get the rate that is going to work. And that's part of the process that we'll work through over the next 4 months.
Tax restructuring has been a big topic for several sessions, if not many years. Yeah. Is this the year we see? Is this the session that we see significant restructuring of the state tax code, i.e., capital gains tax?
Well, you know, nobody wants to raise taxes for the sake of raising taxes. So we need to go through a process of really looking at what are the priorities that we want to invest in, and then what are the resources that we can find to make those investments. And so a capital gains excise tax, that's one of a number of choices that we could look at if new revenue is needed. But there are other choices as well. And I think it's sort of this dual priority, making sure we have enough resources, but also working to make sure that the tax code becomes more fair. We have the most regressive, the most unfair tax system in the country. We're 50th out of 50 states. We joke that our mantra, our bumper sticker should be, we want to be 40th. And that's not usually something that you strive for. But if we became even the 40th best state in tax fairness, we would really be making a significant improvement for the people of Washington State. And one of the things we could do to help with fairness would be to invest in the Working Families Tax Credit, which is in law but hasn't been funded in the past. So there are a lot of ideas like that we'll be exploring this session, and hopefully we'll make progress.
In terms of the tax proposals, if one counter argument to the idea of the capital gains tax is that it would potentially ward off future business, you know, big business job opportunities with CEOs who make a lot of money, who may be looking to set up somewhere where there is no capital gains tax. Is that a concern? Do you think that's valid?
There's a capital gains excise tax in most states, so I don't know that is, you know, is a concern that will win the day. I think that we should have the discussion. I mean, if we were to create a new revenue source, we should dive into the details. We should have the hearings. We should be listening and hearing if that was an objection. How credible is that? Is there data to support that? I think it's too early to say if we were to raise revenue, which path we might go down. But I think we've got to do the research and have the hearings, and that's kind of what we're starting off today on the first day of our legislative session.
I think we've got just under 3 minutes. We talk about housing availability, housing affordability. There's a lot of conversation around restrictions within the GMA, basically, that don't allow people to build the type of housing density that would be necessary to alleviate the pressure, the Growth Management Act. Yeah. You think this is the year maybe there are some changes to the Growth Management Act?
Well, I think anytime you have big, important legislation on the books like the Growth Management Act, it's worth looking at to see if there are tweaks that are needed. I think that largely the Growth Management Act has worked well, so I don't think we need to throw it out. I think we can take the time to look thoughtfully and see if any changes are needed. But remember, one of the things about the Growth Management Act is that the way it's established is that the local communities do have a process for making changes in their growth management areas, and that process is very much in place. Now, it may take a little longer than some people would like, but some of that's intentional so that we don't make rash decisions when we're talking about these important land use decisions.
We've got a couple more areas I really want to cover, if we can cover them quickly. One, have you heard of there's supposedly a transportation proposal in the works that might involve a carbon tax to fund some additional transportation infrastructure. First thoughts on that concept?
Well, I think it's good that we're talking about infrastructure. I think transportation is an area that affects just about everybody in this state. Senator Hobbs, the chair of the Transportation Committee, is exploring some options, and I think he'll have some good public dialogue on that, and we'll see where it goes.
And I know Senator Ranker resigned over the weekend. What's the next step related to that?
There is a process that's outlined in the Constitution where the local party picks 3 candidates, and then the county commissioners for that district get together and make a selection. So that'll be happening. The process has already started.
I know there are some members of your caucus that are very keen on the idea of a state bank, and that perhaps there will be some proposals again this year related to that. The state treasurer warns against that. We'll talk to him shortly. I wanted to know what your thoughts are, and if you think that'll get a lot of traction this year.
You know, the core of the state bank is about using our state resources, all of this money that we already have in reserves, and lending out a little bit of that money rather than going to Wall Street to borrow money and paying interest to somebody outside of our state. So the core of the idea makes sense. In fact, a lot of local municipalities do this. They take a portion of their reserves and then they do these loans and pay themselves back plus interest. So I think it's an idea worthy of a little bit of some additional steps forward. And I'd like to see us take another step forward this year towards that. People sometimes think about a bank and they think we're setting up these retail organizations. It's really about infrastructure investment and using the resources that we, the people of Washington, already have, and leveraging that to move forward. So I'd like us to keep looking at it.
About 15 seconds. Any final thoughts, anything that we didn't get to you want to add?
Well, I'm just very optimistic for this session. We have an amazing Senate Democratic caucus, and really whole Senate. We've the diversity and talent on our team is really encouraging, and looking forward to doing the work of the people of Washington State over the next 105 days, getting done on time and making some progress.
Senate Majority Leader Billig, thank you for your time and your perspective.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll be back after a break. We'll hear from the state treasurer, and then later Republican leaders in the House and Senate, as well as the governor. See you then. Stay with us.
TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. TVW, opening state government to the people of Washington, with unedited coverage of the state legislature, the governor's office, and the state Supreme Court, state government agencies, campaigns and elections, and public policy events in all corners of Washington. Plus our award-winning produced shows and documentaries that offer in-depth, balanced coverage of political events and policy decisions. TVW, opening government for the people of Washington. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News, and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Stream TVW video and audio anywhere, anytime from your Android or Apple device with TVW's new mobile app. Get it now, free from the App Store or Google Play, and watch TVW anywhere.
The Washington State Transportation Improvement Board is celebrating 30 years of completing vital urban and small city projects valued at more than $2.8 billion. TIB has modernized and preserved our streets, has helped build sidewalks, light paths, replace old streetlights, and improve bus routes, and made our streets more safe and efficient. For every $1 TIB adds to a project, $2 to $3 of funding is leveraged from other partners. And our award-winning dashboard tracks every project to achieve the highest level of transparency. TIB.wa.gov.
During the 2019 legislative session, join me, Dave Martinson, for Legislative Review. Broadcasting on TV at 8 and 11 p.m. as well as online at tvw.org, we cover the legislative issues that matter most, from the Capitol to your living room. From the work session to the bill signing, we've got you covered.
Visit and like TVW's Facebook page to keep up to date on our coverage of the legislature, Supreme Court, and more. Our daily coverage memos let you know what we're covering and how we're covering it, whether it's on TV, online, or both. Plus, you'll get previews of our special programs from Inside Olympia and The Impact to TVW at Large and My Favorite Places with Ralph Monroe. The TVW Facebook page, a great way to follow your state government on TVW. State Supreme Court Justice Mary Fairhurst delivers the State of the Judiciary address to a joint session of the State Senate and House of Representatives. Wednesday, January 16th at 11 a.m. Watch it live on TVW and live on the web at tvw.org. TVW takes you back in time with historic Washington. Looking at the people, the places, the history, and the beauty of Washington's past. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government.
Beautiful Singer Tavern, now called Lake Crescent Lodge, here on Lake Crescent in the heart of the Olympic Mountains. I remember coming here as a little boy and just being fascinated by this incredibly clear, beautiful lake. Originally opened as a stop for people to come out on a ferry boat and spend the night and enjoy the beautiful lake. Then the road around the lake was completed, and this became a favorite stopping point for automobiles and early explorers in their cars coming around the rough road in Olympic National Park. Franklin Roosevelt came here in 1937. He was president of the United States, and people had proposed in Congress a national park, which was pretty controversial at the time. Roosevelt spent the evening here at the Singer Tavern, and he met with park officials as well as Senator Homer Bone and Senator Mon Walgren, and they moved ahead shortly thereafter with the plans for Olympic National Park. It's incredibly beautiful and one of the premier national parks of America. Singer Tavern is now called Lake Crescent Lodge, and it's one of my favorite places.
Support for My Favorite Places provided by the Washington Hospitality Association and by Weatherly Inn, Senior Living, where it's home and your family. It's your state government, and TVW opens it to you. Through unedited start-to-finish coverage of state agency meetings, TVW keeps you up to date on issues like healthcare, parks, traffic congestion, and more. Your window to open government is TVW. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Stream TVW video and audio anywhere, anytime from your Android or Apple device with TVW's new mobile app.
This week on Inside Olympia, Washington has a new Department of Children.
Connect with your state government through the TVW app, available free now at the App Store or Google Play. Download it and watch TVW anywhere. Want to help TVW educate the next generation of Washington citizens? Go to tvw.org/celebrating-civics or text TVW to 41444. Follow the link to complete your gift. Proceeds will support Teach with TVW's hands-on civic education program statewide. Donate today and help TVW bring civics to life for Washington students. TVW thanks the cable television industry. Cable providers across the state carry TVW for free as a public service, enabling Washingtonians to watch their state government in action. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government.
It's hard to believe in the state of Washington there's a location where it rains 12 feet a year. I know there's dark winter days when we think that's our house, but there's really only one spot, and that's the Upper Whole River Valley, where we are today. In the 1890s, this whole area was open for homesteading by the United States government, and the Healsdunk family settled here. John Healsdunk, later called the Iron Man of the Hoe, married another German girl that he met through his family, brought her here, and for 17 years and 4 babies, he never left. The Healsdunk family have incredible legends built around them. They homesteaded here before there were any roads, any trails. John mostly worked for the Forest Service and the government, building trails and carrying supplies. Of course, the classic old story about John Healsdunk is the ranger met him on the trail and said, "John, that's an awfully big cook stove you're carrying." And he replied, "It's not the cook stove bothering me, it's the 50-pound sack of flour in the oven that keeps shifting around." I think the story has grown and grown and grown, but nevertheless, this was one tough guy. John Healsdunk, the Iron Man of the Hoe. This is a beautiful location, especially if you like the rain. This truly is one of my favorite places.
Support for My Favorite Places is provided by the Washington Hospitality Association and by Weatherly Inn, senior living where it's home and your family. Washington's chief executive outlines his vision for the state Watch Governor Jay Inslee's State of the State address delivered to a joint session of the House and Senate, followed by the Republican perspective on the 2019 legislature. Tuesday, January 15th at noon, live on TVW and live on the web at tvw.org. Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org. TVW thanks the cable television industry. Cable providers across the state carry TVW for free as a public service, enabling Washingtonians to watch their state government in action. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Follow your state government on your time, on your device. From unedited coverage of state government to the programs you count on. TVW, watch it your way. TVW, opening state government to the people of Washington, with unedited coverage of the state legislature, the governor's office and the state Supreme Court, state government agencies, campaigns and elections, and public policy events in all corners of Washington. Plus our award-winning produced shows and documentaries that offer in-depth, balanced coverage of political events and policy decisions. TVW, opening government for the people of Washington. Keep up on what's happening at the state capitol. Watch TVW, the legislature, Supreme Court, and executive branch. For the unedited gavel-to-gavel coverage of state government you won't find anywhere else, watch TVW.
Welcome back to our live coverage of the start of the 2019 legislative session. We are live in the legislative building, and joining me now is Republican State Treasurer Dwayne Davidson. Thank you for being here today, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Well, your job as the state treasurer, you keep an eye on states' reserves, bond capacity, long-term investments, and the credit rating. And the first question just is Washington on good financial footing right now?
Yes, we are. State revenues are at very good levels. The revenues of the state are very good. Our fund balance is increasing. The short-term cash that that our local governments have on hand, that's part of our local government investment pool, is at record high levels. So times are good here.
Now, last year, you proposed putting the unexpected increase in state funding towards paying down existing debt instead of spending it to pay for existing or new services. This year, lawmakers are coming back with a significant windfall in state revenue. What are your recommendations?
Well, and actually last time I gave them a couple options. Not that they followed, but I wanted not only possibly pay down the state debt, or to pay down our unfunded pension liability, or put it in the rainy day fund, which we call the budget stabilization account. Any of those options would be would have been a good option and would continue to be a good option for the legislators to consider. I'll go through each one for the reasons why. First of all, the state debt. We're the 6th highest per capita debt in the nation. We have a lot of debt, over $20 billion worth of debt, and that's general obligation, and that just cost us a lot of money to maintain. Interest rates have ticked up, so future borrowings will cost us more than they have in the past, and so debt hurts everybody from personal level to state government level, and keeping it at manageable levels is a wise thing to do. The unfunded pension liability, Washington State is pretty good when it comes to our funded status of our pension funds. However, we're not at 100%, and our state investment board does an excellent job, which I'm a member of, but that agency does a wonderful job investing our pension dollars, and I think that is, even though it's not booked directly as a state debt, that is our most expensive debt because of the fact that we're foregoing all the interest rate that they could make, which is historically higher than we make on the other state investments. And so that would be a good option. And the third, of course, is a rainy day fund. Our rainy day fund is not at balances that are recommended by experts like the Government Finance Officers Association, we refer to GFOA, and others. The balance has been ticking up, but it can be higher because I'm not predicting when a recession will happen, but we all know a recession will happen someday. And when that does hit, we count on the rainy day fund and ending fund balance to take us through that rough patch. We especially need that in a state where we are primarily funded through sales tax. It's very, very important that we have a good rainy day fund.
Well, the governor is proposing a $54.4 billion budget, represents nearly $10 billion in additional state spending for the 2-year cycle, about a 20% increase in state spending. Part of that, not the majority, but part of that would come from state reserves. Other parts would come from increases to existing taxes and or changes to those taxes and the creation of a new capital gains tax. The argument for from the other side of the fence is that when the state is on good financial footing and when things are good, that's the time to make investments in additional government services. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's also a good time to put money into the rainy day fund so that we have it when we desperately need it most. I think that ought to be the #1 priority. And I'm very concerned about a capital gains tax because a capital gains tax is a form of income tax, and I'm opposed to a state income tax. I believe that that's one of the reasons why Washington State is doing so well is the fact that we do not have a state income tax. I think you look around and the few states that do not have a state income tax are those that are prospering very well now. And capital gains tax would be a very expensive tax to administer. That would have to be an entirely new department or division that would have to be created to do that. And so there would be a lot of startup and operational costs in collecting that. And basically we'd be taxing prosperity, and I think that is one of the reasons why our state prospers so well. So I'm really concerned about that. I think that it's just imperative, because I believe that we are now coming to probably nearer, don't want to make any kind of, I can't make predictions, I don't have that kind of talent, but I think that we're ending one of the longest periods of economic expansion this nation's seen. A recession is probably just a few years away, and I think it's really imperative that we get our budget stabilization count on better footing.
I guess the counter argument to that would be that the state, many critics of the state's tax code say that it's regressive because of the reliance on sales tax, and that the business and occupation tax too is a there's a tremendous strain on business, and the argument is made that the capital gains tax would be a way to alleviate some of that.
Yeah, that old argument has been around for a long time, and there probably is some truth to the fact that there some analysis can point out that there's a degree of that. But at the same time, there's not much loophole to the excise tax on the sales tax. You pay it. You buy a new car, you don't have much of a loophole. You pay that excise tax, and the rich buy more expensive cars. And so I think that if you want loopholes and you want ways to get out of something, create an income tax, and normally those loopholes will soon follow. So I still think that the tax structure we have in this state is a better model.
Now, you've been outspoken about a legislative proposal to consider creating a state bank. You recently put out a report that warns against establishing one. What are your concerns?
Well, right now, presently, there's only one state that has a state bank, and that's North Dakota. That bank was formed many years ago because of lack of commercial bank in the area of the Dakotas that the farmers needed at the time, and it has kind of grown into a separate entity that is not really the type of bank that the people that are for a state bank here really kind of envision. It's small. It's only got one branch in North Dakota, and the suggestion of what the folks that want a state bank here is for something much more grand than that. And I just don't think that kind of risk ought to be accumulated it shouldn't be taken on by the taxpayers of the state. It's a very risky endeavor to run a state bank. Right now, we do not pay that much for our commercial bank services. It's just real risky to take that kind of liability on at the state level, and they're just there's just no need for it.
Well, so proponents of the state bank say that Wall Street's proven itself pretty risky territory too, pointing to the last recession, and say, maybe it could be better managed at the state level, the local level. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that there's a lot of, if you look around the country, there's a lot of examples of things gone wrong at the government level too. And so I totally agree that there has been some not very good things done in the banking industry. But at least we still have options, and we have the ability to pick and choose who we bank with, and we have competition, we have options. Center it all in a state bank, you really take away that kind of opportunity. What concerns me most about a state bank is it takes a lot of money to start a bank. It takes a whole lot of money. And there's only so much pots of money around that could be used to capitalize a state bank. One of those is a local government investment pool. I mentioned that just a few minutes ago. That is the excess cash of the 500 taxing jurisdictions that's all throughout the state. That's local government's money. That's not our money. It's actually arbitrary that's even here. They have a choice of where they invest it. They happen to invest it with the state treasurer for their short-term investment needs. And we would have to obligate local governments to do that, like they just recently did in the territory of Samoa, America's Samoa, where they actually require those deposits to come into the state bank. The other pot of money, of course, is our pension reserves. And I just don't think that the folks that are the current people drawing to pension and those that will be drawing pensions in the future want that type of those deposits risked on making loans out of the state bank.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I want to cover two other quick issues. First off, the state's generating a significant amount of money from the sale of marijuana under the state's state legal market here, but there are still obstacles for that industry as far as banking is concerned because it's illegal under federal law. Banks are afraid to do business with the marijuana industry here. What are your thoughts about that, and is there anything legislators could do to impact this?
I don't know, other than just be generally supportive and and help us at the federal level change the law. There's not much we can do at the state level because unfortunately this is a federal issue. And I do appreciate the fact that I just recently got appointed in the National Association of State Treasurers, the state treasurers from around the nation. I have recently been appointed the Western States chair on their executive board, and more importantly, the chairman of the banking committee. And I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. This spring on several occasions arguing for the States Act. And the States Act is a bipartisan act that's got both Senator Gardner and Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren's are co-sponsors of that. So it's a good bipartisan piece of legislation that would basically address the issue about the Fed interference. What it does in real simple terms is it mirrors federal law to the state law, whatever that state law may be. So that would completely alleviate the concern without making marijuana necessarily legal at the federal level. It addresses our concerns here, and it would address the banking concerns, and so that we would be able to address this issue about deposits of cannabis dollars throughout the state, because it is a real problem. There's very limited financial institutions, a couple of credit unions and a couple of community banks that will take cannabis dollars now. They are assuming some risk because it is still, there's still real concerns at the federal level. And the only way we can ever get this addressed is at the federal level. What I'm really excited about this bipartisan bill that's out is that there was even one remark, however so slight, but there was actually one remark from our president that said that he would be supportive of this also. So hopefully that legislation will be able to move this year. I'm working with other state treasurers to support it and getting a lot of support in that regards. We're basically out of time, but before we go, tell us a little bit about your educational modules and what they mean for the citizens. I'm really excited. Keep it brief, please. We've recently hired a financial literacy person in our office. We've recently put out modules. I think there's 70 in total that help from both from students to adults. Learn all sorts of things about their own personal finances that might help them and be able to do that. You can find that on the State Treasurer's website. So really excited about that as we push for financial literacy throughout our state. Well, we're out of time, but thank you for sharing your perspective, Treasurer Davidson, and we'll be back after a break. We've still got more to come with legislative leaders and the governor. Stay with us.
TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. The 2019 state legislature convenes at the state capitol January through April. Lawmakers will debate issues from mental health to carbon emissions, transportation to taxes. TVW opens your state legislature to you. We bring you every committee hearing, every floor debate, and press conferences from legislative leaders and the governor. Watch it all live on TVW and live streaming on demand anytime at tvw.org. Visit and like TVW's Facebook page to keep up to date on our coverage of the legislature, Supreme Court, and more. Our daily coverage memos let you know what we're covering and how we're covering it, whether it's on TV, online, or both. Plus, you'll get previews of our special programs from Inside Olympia and The Impact to TVW at Large and My Favorite Places with Ralph Monroe. The TVW Facebook page, a great way to follow your state government on TVW. Stream TVW video and audio anywhere, anytime from your Android or Apple device with TVW's new mobile app.
This week on Inside Olympia, Washington has a new Department of Children.
Connect with your state government through the TVW app, available free now at the App Store or Google Play. Download it and watch TVW anywhere.
Support for TVW provided by...
We are really looking for those students who are committed to the state of Washington and have a deep appreciation of what it means to be out there as a rural, underserved area physician.
We're looking for people that are agile, people that are resilient.
It's important that students learn out in the community the issues that are facing patients there. Every person on the planet has their own personal medical story. We're here to serve the whole state.
Well, you know, here in Washington State, we're blessed with so many locations. It's our natural environment, history, it just runs the gamut. So I hope that everyone enjoys my favorite places.
TVW now brings you state government in high definition. Thanks to Comcast, TVW is available in high definition on Comcast Channel 320 in most areas. On TV, online, on Facebook, on Roku, and now in HD. More ways TVW is bringing your state government to you.
Hi, I'm Austin Jenkins. These days it can be tough to find in-depth, meaningful discussions about the public policy issues you care about, like schools, traffic, policing, or healthcare. But that's what we give you each week here on TVW's Inside Olympia program. You can watch us each week on TV or online at tvw.org. And thank you for watching.
TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government.
In these times of so much of a partisan divide, so much of a conservative liberal divide, urban rural divide, it's really really exciting to be working on an issue that I think is going to explode in the state as far as construction and jobs.
Coming up next on TVW at Large, innovative cross-laminated timber products are generating headlines in Washington. What place do these mass timber creations have in the Evergreen State, and how could code revisions allow their usage more often? That and more on TVW at Large right now. Thank you for watching TVW at Large. I'm your host, Dave Martinson. On this episode of TVW at Large, we spoke to policy and industry experts about the current climate for and the future of cross-laminated timber in Washington. Cross-laminated timber is a prefabricated, specialty engineered wood product. CLT can be crafted by using wood coming from trees that are dead, prone to insect infestations, as well as those trees that could serve as fuel for wildfires.
We've got 2.7 million acres of overstocked, fire-prone forest that needs some level of active management, but unfortunately, due to the complexity of accessing a lot of those acres and the lack of milling infrastructure, it can be really difficult to get the footprint moving forward.
CLT has also been highlighted as a safe option for building construction.
Mass timber in general, representing cross-laminated timber panels and glulam beams and columns, it not only represents speed and efficiency in the construction, but it also represents a better building. And that is in areas especially of seismic, we can control with these large format panels the ductility in the system, how energy is dissipated. And while that's a very technical answer, it also is demonstrative of where the industry as a whole is going.
The use of mass timber products
Use of CLT has been an important issue for state lawmakers. During the 2018 legislative session, engrossed Senate Bill 5450 was passed and signed into law.
Thankfully, there's been a lot of movement in the legislature in the past couple of years, especially last session. Senate Bill 5450, sponsored by Senator Leas and Senator Warnick, directs the State Building Code Council to adopt rules associated with mass timber.
Among the possible revisions are changes to current building height restrictions.
Mass timber is limited to structural use up to 6 stories here in Washington State and throughout the country. What is before the State Building Code Council right now is a proposal that would allow for the structural use of mass timber up to 18 stories.
As the Building Code Council and state lawmakers look at the future of CLT projects, Katerra has recently opened a 250,000 square foot facility in Spokane Valley that will start manufacturing CLT products in early 2019.
The cross-laminated timber facility in Spokane really represents one segment of overall product for Katerra. The investment in CLT represents that the technology is ready for market, that integrated in with these other materials, other systems, that is now competitive. And Washington and the West Coast in general is the right place for that emerging technology to make it to actual commercialization.
According to former state lawmaker Brian Hatfield, the growth of cross-laminated timber could mean more employment opportunities.
One of the things I'm hopeful for on cross-laminated timber is as the demand continues to increase for these buildings, which will mean more, more demand for 2x6s and other, the raw material that goes into CLT, that we'll see hopefully fewer log exports. It's certainly important to our timber companies to be able to have that when they need to be able to sell overseas if they have to, but if they don't have to, that means more jobs here in Washington State.
Support for TVW at Large provided by the Washington Forest Protection Association and by the Arcora Foundation.
During the 2019 legislative session, join me, Dave Martinson, for Legislative Review. Broadcasting on TV at 8 and 11 p.m. as well as online at tvw.org, we cover the legislative issues that matter most. From the Capitol to your living room, from the work session to the bill signing, we've got you covered.
TVW thanks the cable television industry. Cable providers across the state carry TVW for free as a public service, enabling Washingtonians to watch their state government in action. It's your state government, and TVW opens it to you. Through unedited start-to-finish coverage of state agency meetings, TVW keeps you up to date on issues like healthcare, parks, traffic congestion, and more. Your window to open government is TVW. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. TVW takes you back in time with historic Washington. looking at the people, the places, the history, and the beauty of Washington's past. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW.
Hi, I'm Austin Jenkins. Join me on TVW's Inside Olympia for interesting guests and in-depth interviews on the issues you care about. Watch us each week on TV or online at tvw.org.
Stream TVW video and audio anywhere, anytime from your Android or Apple device with TVW's new mobile app.
This week on Inside Olympia, Washington has a new Department of Children.
Connect with your state government
families
through the TVW app, available free now at the App Store or Google Play. Download it and watch TVW anywhere. Washington's chief executive outlines his vision for the state. Watch Governor Jay Inslee's State of the State address delivered to a joint session of the House and Senate, followed by the Republican perspective on the 2019 legislature. Tuesday, January 15th at noon, live on TVW and live on the web at tvw.org. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government.
Hi, I'm Austin Jenkins. Join me on TVW's Inside Olympia for interesting guests and in-depth interviews on the issues you care about. Watch us each week on TV or online at tvw.org.
Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. TVW thanks the cable television industry. Cable providers across the state carry TVW for free as a public service, enabling Washingtonians to watch their state government in action. Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org. Follow your state government on your time, on your device, from unedited coverage of state government to the programs you count on. TVW, watch it your way. TVW, opening state government to the people of Washington, with unedited coverage of the state legislature, the governor's office, the state Supreme Court, state government agencies, campaigns and elections, and public policy events in all corners of Washington. Plus our award-winning produced shows and documentaries that offer in-depth, balanced coverage of political events and policy decisions. TVW, opening government for the people of Washington.
Welcome back to TVW's live coverage of the start of the 2019 legislative session. Joining me now is House Republican leader J.T. Wilcox. Representative Wilcox, thank you for sharing your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, heading into this session, you've got a 57 to 41 vote split here, with your caucus has 41 votes. This is coming from a time when there were 50 to 48. There were just 2 votes basically separating the majority from the minority. Now, there's a much more significant numerical disadvantage for House Republicans. How does the minority throw its weight around in a democratically dominated legislature when the Senate also has a majority of Democratic lawmakers?
Well, you know, it's right. We have single-party government in the state of Washington right now. And I think that actually makes it even more important that we have a serious opposition party, minority party, because single-party government isn't good for the state. It means that it's very difficult to do government oversight, for example, because it is one party generally feeling reluctant to investigate the executive branch, for example. And so the minority has to be heard. And we take that very seriously. As you know, I'm a former floor leader, and my job was to make sure that we did the best possible job of presenting our arguments to the people of the state and to the Speaker of the House. And we're going to take that even more seriously now that we don't have any kind of divided government.
Democratic lawmakers and the governor have proposed a flurry of progressive bills that historically some of them may have been unlikely to pass due to the close power divide, or until last year, Republican control of the Senate. Will this be the year that we see things like a capital gains tax pass?
Well, they certainly have voted for budgets in the past that depended on a capital gains tax and B&O tax increases and just about any other kind of tax that you could imagine. And in the end, had to negotiate those out of the budget. So they have been willing to take that vote. They say now that they're willing to take that vote in the House. I hear that the Senate may not be as anxious, but again, our job is to be heard, and we are in one of the longest recoveries of the economy in post-war history of the United States. We know that this isn't going to last forever, and I think one of the most important things that we need to do as a minority is continually remind people that when you have an unsustainable budget, the folks in the end that they wanted to help the most are the ones that are hurt, as we saw during the last recession.
When you're outgunned by that many votes, surely you have to make compromises on bills you're not in love with to get assistance in stopping legislation you can't stand, or passing legislation you support. Is that accurate? Is that fair?
Well, it takes two sides to have a compromise. And we will see if those 57 people in the majority are interested in having opposing opinions included in what they finally pass. And we're certainly going to be anxious to work together when that's merited. And I think right now we're in a period of history where we do have a lot of issues in common, whether you represent a big city like Seattle or a small town like Yelm. We are seeing many of the same problems when it comes to affordable housing, homelessness, substance addiction, and mental health challenges. So there's lots of reasons for us to work together.
Republicans got clobbered in the midterms in certain areas, King County being one key example. Democrats say that, you know, voters voted on issues they care about that Republicans weren't supporting. Do you think that's fair? And as a caveat, how do you rebuild after something like that?
Well, I would point out that there was a wave election. That was in the primary, and we had 17 seats that were underwater. And by the time we came to the general, we had dialed that back to losing only 7. And so I think that there was sort of this high water mark. It's already coming back. But Republicans in Washington generally try to have a local election on local issues about local people. Democrats tend to do better when an election is nationalized. And I think it was pretty plain that this was a national election year, and I don't expect that to happen next time.
So the governor is proposing a number of things, $54.4 billion budget, it's been reported that it represents about a 20% increase in state spending over the 2-year period. Among the programs, free college program, public health option, more funding for state workers, K-12, higher ed, mental health, which I know is bipartisan, and then also a $1 billion investment or so in ORCA recovery. Now, about $3 billion of that comes from tax revenue, either from raising certain existing taxes and changing them somewhat, or creating a new capital gains tax. What's your proposal? I mean, what's your perspective on the governor's proposal?
Well, my perspective is colored by the fact that I came here in 2011, and I was the only freshman on House Ways and Means. The first vote that I took was the biggest set of budget cuts in the history of Washington. And in sitting through those hearings, I found out how many people were getting hurt. Because in the really good years leading up to the recession, even though revenues were increasing at record rates, there was no budget sustainability. And the minute we had a cloudy day, we had a budget crisis, and it hurt the people that it was designed to help. And we are setting up exactly the same scenario this time. This is exactly what they did in the years leading up to the Great Recession. And again, it's not people that are well off that are hurt when you have an unsustainable budget. It's the people that most need the help of the state. And when we're doing budgets, we should be considering how consistent can we be with this plan, and can we carry it out even if we have a rainy day.
Last year, the legislature began work to overhaul sexual harassment policies and procedures, from how complaints are handled to how investigations are conducted. What's the next step in that process?
Well, we have made policy changes already. There may be some bills, but I've been in the private sector all my life, and one thing that I have learned is that you can have perfect policies. It's also up to the management to make sure that they are communicating clearly and frequently what the expectations are, and also making it very plain. Folks, these aren't rules just for people you don't know. These are rules for people that you know very well, and there are no exceptions. And so I would say, to really make this effective and change behavior here in the Capitol as it needs to be changed, all of the caucus leaders, all four corners, and right down, into the new members, needs to be talking about how important it is that we change behavior and how seriously we don't want anyone else to get hurt.
Where do you see the greatest opportunities for bipartisan compromise? And as a caveat, where do you think the biggest points of contention might be, just based on what we know now heading into the session?
Well, I can think of a couple of policy areas where I think that we're going to have broad agreement. My seatmate Andrew Barkis is going to be bringing out a series of bills all around housing affordability, and he has been housing people his whole career. Our deputy caucus chair, Gina Mossbrucker, is bringing out a bill that I am really excited about, one of the first major efforts we've seen around domestic violence. There's no reason on earth that we couldn't have agreement in trying to address that tragedy that is so widespread. And Richard DeBolt is bringing out a Republican approach to climate change that I think also has the potential of being one of the approaches that can be moved forward.
So the governor's public option proposal, what do you think about that?
Well, we are going to be looking hard at everything that comes out. The governor's proposals usually are starting points. I don't really think that we need to tear up our healthcare system again. One of the things that I regret about Obamacare is the private sector was in the middle of an immense amount of innovation that had a great deal of promise. And that all ended when we had the big national debate. And we are seeing really interesting proposals, not necessarily from large healthcare companies, but the largest tech companies. And so I'm hoping that we're going to have some time to innovate around healthcare and really sort of break the old mold. And I don't think just adding a public option is going to do that.
Is there any update about who might fill Representative Matt Manweller's seat?
Well, we will know that today. All of those county commissioners are meeting, I think, around noon today. And in fact, our House Republican Chief of Staff is driving over there so she can expedite the swearing in and the travel of the new member.
Just sort of parting thoughts here. Is there anything I didn't ask about that you'd like to bring up, or any big area you think we shouldn't overlook?
Well, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the last year of Frank Chop's speakership is going to look like. He has had an enormous influence in this institution. I think there's going to be a fair amount of jockeying for position, and there's going to be some opportunity, I think, for the minority party to have a little more flexibility than perhaps has been allowed in the past.
Representative Wilcox, we are out of time, but thank you very much for making time for us and our viewers on the opening day of the session. I'm sure we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we will be back with the Senate Republican leader, Mark Schessler, and later, Governor Inslee. Stay with us. We'll be back after the break.
The 2019 state legislature convenes at the state capitol January through April. Lawmakers will debate issues from mental health to carbon emissions, transportation to taxes. TVW opens your state legislature to you. We bring you every committee hearing, every floor debate, and press conferences from legislative leaders and the governor. Watch it all live on TVW and live streaming on demand anytime at tvw.org. Visit and like TVW's Facebook page to keep up to date on our coverage of the legislature, Supreme Court, and more. Our daily coverage memos let you know what we're covering and how we're covering it, whether it's on TV, online, or both. Plus, you'll get previews of our special programs from Inside Olympia and The Impact to TVW at Large and My Favorite Places with Ralph Monroe. The TVW Facebook page, a great way to follow your state government on TVW. State Supreme Court Justice Mary Fairhurst delivers the State of the Judiciary address to a joint session of the State Senate and House of Representatives. Wednesday, January 16th at 11 a.m. Watch it live on TVW and live on the web at tvw.org. TVW thanks the cable television industry. Cable providers across the state carry TVW for free as a public service, enabling Washingtonians to watch their state government in action. Stream TVW video and audio anywhere, anytime with TVW's new mobile app.
This week on Inside Olympia, Washington has a
Connect with your state government through the TVW app, available free now at the App Store or Google Play. Download it and watch TVW anywhere. Washington's chief executive outlines his vision for the state. Watch Governor Jay Inslee's State of the State address delivered to a joint session of the House and Senate, followed by the Republican perspective on the 2019 legislature. Tuesday, January 15th at noon, live on TVW and live on the web at tvw.org. TVW, for more than 20 years, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government. Watch arguments before the state's highest court. The state Supreme Court's winter docket runs January 15th through March 19th, with cases on select Tuesdays and Thursdays. All Supreme Court arguments are webcast live and archived at tvw.org. Get more from TVW. Follow us on Twitter at TVW News and find us on Facebook for exclusive content and more. Another way for you to connect with TVW. Follow your state government on your time, on your device. From unedited coverage of state government to the programs you count on. TVW, watch it your way. TVW, opening state government to the people of Washington, with unedited coverage of the state legislature, the governor's office, and the state Supreme Court, state government agencies, campaigns and elections, and public policy events in all corners of Washington. Plus,
welcome back to TVW's live coverage of the start of the 2019 legislative session. Joining me now is Senate Republican leader Mark Schessler. Senator Schessler, thank you for your time today.
Great to be with you.
This session, you're heading into a year where you're going from a narrow majority 25-24 split, narrow minority 25-24 split, to now a 28-21 split, with the 28 being the other party. And likewise, the House went from a fairly narrow 50-48 split to a 57-41 Democratic majority. How does the minority party sort of throw its weight around in a democratically dominated legislature?
Well, first of all, you say no to bad ideas, and you lead with better ideas, and you look at common ground, issues, budget policies that we share common interests in, and work forward without surrendering your principles.
But I know mental health is an issue that has been a priority for the Senate Republican caucus. There's one proposal, I believe, of a $500 million bond related to mental health issues. Is that an area of compromise that you see?
Well, certainly mental health and housing affordability, access are areas that, if you follow the many panels that we've had in the weeks leading up to this session, you'll see common agreement that mental health covers a lot of areas. There's a lot of interest in doing something. Housing affordability, access also falls into that area. My members put out proposals on both before the results of the election were done, because we didn't wait for an Elway poll. We started moving long before Elway told us what to think. So we'll move on our ideas, look for areas that we can work together.
There have been some proposals, including from the governor, that might be considered more progressive than what you would typically have seen in a legislative session when there was divided government. Things like public health care option, free college program, on top of more funding for state workers, K-12, higher ed, and multi-billion-dollar investments for orcas and the environment. What do you think about the governor's proposal and the legislative support for some of these ideas?
Well, the legislative support is yet to be determined. These are all nice ideas until you run out of other people's money to spend. And when you run out of other people's money to spend, you go back and ask the hardworking taxpayer